yo, man, can you see the mics, man?
Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for you Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, are you bummed that you didn't get to see Mitch Trubisky on primetime tonight?
A little bit. A, because it would have been nice to see a Bears loss to expose them for the frauds that they are. But B, it's always good that Mitch Trubisky's out there for the brand.
Exactly. This is really just for the brand. You put Nick Foles in a position, or you put the Bears in a position where Nick Foles is going to have to be the one who beats you, and then he beats you. He beats you through the air in dink and dunk passes. He beats you in the air through pass interference penalties. And
Right.
man, just that team cannot run the ball to save their lives, and it really was all on Nick Foles. And Nick Foles emerged victorious, despite the fact that the play calling at the end of the game for the Bears was atrocious. This team just keeps lucking into this dumb stuff.
It's nuts, man. We talk about it a little bit more in the Patreon only episode, but yeah, this team's not. They have a plus 5 point differential, and they're 4-1. Like, they need to be put away.
They really are this year's Packers. It is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
The Patreon episode this week, by the way, is a combination of Tuesday afternoon's conversation and tonight, where it turned out to be oddly topical, where we ended up discussing this game, the Bears and the Bucks, and we ended up talking a bit about the Bears record and how they're looking into all of this. So if you are interested in such a thing, check that out. So welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Want to thank you guys so much for listening, for sharing links about Norse Code, for telling people about it, and for donating to the show if you find value in what we produce for multimedia content. If you'd like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate $3.50 or $3.50 a month to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay and to access those bonus episodes, like I just said about the one that we just recorded, talking about the result of the Bears and Bucks game. Or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well if you'd like to do more of a one-time donation to the show. So again, if you're interested in such a thing, you can do that. This is a very special week for Norse Code and for the Vikings, as the Vikings once again are playing the Seahawks, and those who have listened to the show for a long period of time are aware of the special ties that Arif begrudgingly seems to have, fights against them tooth and nail most of the year, to Seattle Seahawks Twitter. And as a result of this unbreakable bond, despite how badly he wants to break it, Arif has tried to do something special for this week.
So given how bizarre but passionate Seahawks fans are about insisting that I'm a member of Seahawks Twitter, we've decided to harness it. I want to give it a little bit of credit to, I think his Twitter handle now is Ben_the_cook or something weird like that. I don't know, man. Ben_the_cook came up with the idea of last year of using all of this like really weird energy, and also he felt kind of bad about annoying me all this time, to try and figure out like a charity to give to in response to this. So I was able to pick out a charity in the Washington State area called the Lavender Rights Project, that provides know your rights education, legal services, and skills development training to LGBTQ youth in the state of Washington. And the reason I picked it is because it's a pretty small organization. I think it would have a really big impact to provide them with the funds. I looked up kind of the people who've interacted with them, and I've seen kind of what people have said about them before I picked them, and people had a lot of really positive things to say about them. And also they're a fairly transparent organization in terms of their funds. So And I know that a similar organization like Out Front in Minnesota has done a lot of really great things for trans and non-binary youth and trans and non-binary just identifying people in the state of Minnesota, and they didn't seem to the best of my knowledge, have a similar organization in Washington. So, directed funds to them last year, raised over $1,000. I'm not really sure kind of how much, because it was kind of done ad hoc, but it was $1,000 to $1,500, and that was really excellent. So that's kind of the goal I wanted to hit this year. And as of this recording, we've hit like $3,000, which is really phenomenal, and it represents a really big chunk of their fundraising. And I was able to actually coordinate with them this time in order to get this done. So there's like a landing page and stuff like that too, where we can keep track. So yeah, we were able to do that. A bunch of people in Seahawks Twitter, a bunch of people who follow me that are not in Seahawks Twitter have donated. There have been over 70 donors as of this recording. I'm over the moon. I got an email from one of them, including some messages from people who were like directly impacted by some of these funds. So I kind of teared up a little bit too. It's already having a big impact.
So again, if you'd like to do that, what is the link again, Arif?
Oh yeah, it's let me find it. Or Arif's fundraiser.fundraise.org, and the second fundraise doesn't have a D in it, so it's Arif's fundraiser.fundraise.org. And of course, as always, we'll include a link in the show notes.
Yep. So if you are interested in such a thing, you can go ahead and donate there and make a difference in a few people's lives. So we do have a preview to get to, so we're going to go right into that. There was an interview done earlier today with Michael-Shawn Dugar from The Athletic that Arif did. So we're going to go to that interview right now.
All right, I'm here with my colleague from The Athletic, Michael-Shawn Dugar. How you doing, man?
I'm all right. I'm a little worried about how long the season will last, but until it completely shuts down, I am excited about covering a winning team, because I read a lot of the coverage of my colleagues who do not, and it is a struggle, and I feel very bad, and it makes me feel privileged to have Russell Wilson in my same area code.
That must be nice, yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't take it for granted, man. I try to read everybody, but I mean that's 31 other writers. But I mean, I really am intrigued. Like, how are people handling like covering the Browns? The Browns are good now, but like week 1, I was like, Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
No, it's tough, right? Because there's only so long before you can pivot to talking about the draft, right? You can't do that week 2, right?
Yeah, well, unless you're in Cleveland, to be fair,
that's a tradition there. But I mean, like, the Chargers, right? They've been good for a long time. They get bad. You're like, well, I don't know what to talk about now.
Yeah, and I really feel bad for like people who are in a market where like mediocrity has become the thing, or when you're bad, no one cares. Like in Detroit or like a Jacksonville, like Cleveland, at least when they get bad, they're like laughably bad. Or even the 2 New York teams are like laughably bad.
Oh yeah,
little intrigue. Yeah. Like if the Broncos are bad, who really cares outside of college? That's a tough spot. I really feel for all my colleagues whose team don't have a quarterback. Really, that's like their main, or the quarterback stinks.
Well, let's talk about the Seahawks quarterback for a bit. So he's finally cooking. The thing that I find kind of interesting about the let Russ cook stuff is that I think it's one of those moments where like Twitter impacts real life, because one of the things I have to remind myself is that Twitter's not real life, right? Like most of the things that occur on Twitter that I'm hyper aware of, like you meet someone in a grocery store, socially distanced, of course, and they have no idea what you're talking about. But Let Russ Cook didn't just get like an ESPN thing, thanks Mina, but it's on shirts. People are showing up to games with the Let Russ Cook shirts on. You wrote a story about a fan who did that in Miami. It's people are talking about it. It's people on the team know about it. Like, when does that occur?
Man, that's a good question. I think, well, the fans have been talking about it for a while. They didn't have the tagline that they've kind of adopted now. And as I wrote kind of in that story, the losing to the Cowboys in 2018 in the playoffs really pissed people off. Like, if you go back and look at the story I wrote, or like my mentions from that game, the comments are all just, why did the coaching staff do this? There was like an overwhelming thought that the coaching staff was at fault. And I think that's a theme in Seattle. Like, nothing's ever like the players' fault No, it's never any of the prominent players' fault. Like even Super Bowl 49, Russ threw the worst interception in franchise history, and he's like fourth on the totem pole in terms of people that catch the blame for it. It's very interesting. Like I bet Tony Romo sees that and is very jealous. Like what the hell? Like, but anyway, that's the Dallas game kind of sparked it, and then Pete Carroll's like, how do I put this? Seahawks fans are really nerdy, and they're really like analytically inclined. At least the ones that I deal with. So if you're like analytically inclined, Russell Wilson's your guy. Like every metric tells you he's great, and it tells you Pete Carroll doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So over time, those two things have kind of just built up, and now Russ is like one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Meanwhile, the Seahawks are like the run heaviest team in the league. You know, other than like the Ravens over like last year or so. So it got to a point where Seahawks Twitter became so strong that Pete Carroll had no choice but to hear about it. And the unique thing about Seahawks Twitter is that they now kind of officially have a history of things like influencing the actual team. Like you know all about like Cable Thanos, the guy who is on Twitter, who makes the amazing video. Like his video production is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
He was hired by Russell Wilson last year. Like he worked for, I think Russ's company is called like West to East Empire. He worked for West to East, a dude on Twitter who made funny videos, who goes to like Western Washington University, I think, or lived in Ellensburg, which is about 2 hours outside of Seattle. You got this guy working for the starting quarterback off of the funny meme videos he makes on the internet. So like with that in the background, you understand that like Seahawks Twitter can make things happen. So then let Russ Cook get to Russ, and then it gets to Brian Schottenheimer, the OC, and eventually it gets to Pete Carroll, who has a guy who like handles all of his social media and all that. So they had no choice. And then on top of that, you know, Russell Wilson believes in it. So all of those factors coming in, it was like, oh, now the Seahawks are the pass happiest team in the league through 4 weeks, I think.
Well, so they are, according to I think a couple of people, so like Seth Walder, Ben Baldwin, just everybody who does kind of like neutral situation pass rates or first and second down pass rates. Seahawks are number one in the league, which I find that interesting too, because it almost actually gives kind of credence to some of the concerns that people had. You know, I don't want to name names or anything like that, but you know, like radio personalities or whoever who were saying, you know, hey, you know, you let Russ cook people. You people in Seahawks or that love let Russ cook. You're going to tear this team apart because you're going to drive a wedge between Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll. And obviously that didn't happen. But the part that they're right about is that it potentially influenced team decision making, if kind of the order of events you're talking about is correct, right? That it got to Russ, and Russ was like, hey, I'm really good. We should consider this. And, you know, they decided not to have a conflict, and they just decided to let one of the best quarterbacks in football pass the ball. But it kind of lends credence to the idea that there was actually an influence from, you know, these people that could have potentially led to maybe some internal disagreement in the Seahawks.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that made Let Russ Cook so strong, I should throw this in here. I always like to call it Establish the Russ, because it makes fun of Pete Carroll's Establish the Run thing. That's what I always use the hashtag. And
that's way better, actually.
I think so. Like objectively speaking, I think it makes more sense, and it actually speaks to what people want Russ to do. It's not necessarily about throwing more; it's about when he throws. It's not that running is bad. It's that like if that's your first thing you do on a team with Russell Wilson, that's stupid. So establishing Russell is the better thing. But either way, no matter what the theme was, part of the reason that it also got so big is because it had detractors. It had non-believers. It had
that might be a big part of it, is that there was a lot of pushback.
Yeah, like even after that Cowboys game in 2018, that playoff loss in the wild card round, like I think it was like Mina Kimes, and she was on somebody's radio show. I think the 710, she was an ESPN affiliate, of course. And they were like debating why the Seahawks lost. Mina was like, no, Russell was great. They should have thrown more. And then the hosts were like, nah, you're tripping. And like that because the hosts were willing to validate the argument, it became more of just a Twitter thing, because Mina is not just like a Twitter presence, right? So because it had people who were like, this is stupid, but even if they were saying it's stupid, they were saying it. Like they were addressing it on radio or on TV. Like shout out to Ben Baldwin. He tracked down all of the, not all, but a lot of the people who had prominent voices calling, the idea of throwing more stupid, whether it was, I sent him one of some people on FS1, there's people on ESPN, there's people locally, just all kinds of people dismissing the idea. And I think that's what made it stronger, actually, believe it or not, is because there were people who didn't believe in it, but they still had to address it. And it like breathed more life into the idea. So now here we are with people having to walk back all their bad takes and address like the thing that may have saved, the Seahawks season.
Yeah, well, no, that's actually. I'll put the Ben Baldwin piece in our show notes so people can find it. That's actually a really good point too. I will not make any connections to the political theater about what it means when you entertain particular questions and how it establishes those questions, and instead ask about the passing game. Hey, so are they doing just more of the same, like from a play design perspective, offensively? Is it just, they use a lot of the same passing plays from before, from last season, but it's just more often, or have they done something else offensively to help make the passing game a little bit more potent?
I think one of the things they're doing is just moving DK Metcalf around a lot more, because it's easy for people to dunk on anyone who thought his 3-cone time is like why he fell, and which I understand.
It's so funny, dude. The 3-cone thing is so funny.
And that is stupid to knock any receiver for, like, any receiver who's built like DK. It's like, well, okay, whatever. The other part that he legitimately fell in the draft because he had a lot of drops, and he broke his neck. Like those are two things. The teams are like, he's fast, he's big, but he broke his neck, and I think he led FBS in drop percentage, FBS receivers in drop percentage, which for a receiver that's like a legitimate.
Pretty big.
And the other thing is like he couldn't do a ton of different routes last year. Like you look at his success from 2019, he's running from the left side of the quarterback, like the variation of like 4 different routes. That's it. He just happened to be damn good at them. But he was basically a one-trick pony. His one trick was just really elite, which is fine. I always thought. And now it's like, okay, let's put DK in the slot. Let's kill him from the right side. Let's just a really good example is after they took a 24-19 lead at Miami on Sunday, Russ had a run play called at the line from under center, saw that I think it was Xavier Howard was playing like 12 yards off DK. So Russ just grabbed the ball and just threw it to DK. And DK ended up picking up 30 yards. Like DK and Russ have realized like we are the cheat code. And that's one of the main differences, I think, this year. And other than that, really, they're running all the same, like similar concepts they would run. They've always had quick passing game stuff. They've always had the deep crossers to Tyler. Russ has always loved his tight ends. He's always trusted his running backs to pick up yak if he can't see anything downfield. It's just when they're doing it. They're just doing it to start the game instead of like waiting till it's the fourth quarter, like, damn, we down 9. All right, Russ, save the day. They realized that wasn't working. So it's just that's why I like establish the Russ. They make sure Russ is cooking to start the game, and then you can grind it out on the ground, and then you'll get that balance that Pete Carroll swears by.
Yeah, you get your 35 touches or whatever.
Yeah, with that, like all the great running backs their teams are undefeated when they get 25 carries or something like that.
Yeah,
it's really
something dumb. Like that. Yeah. Well, let's talk about those receivers a bit. You talked about DK, but there's David Moore. I think a lot of people become enamored with him. There's Tyler Lockett, who I think, every time I have a guest on, we talk about a receiver, and at some point the word underrated gets thrown out. But I think for Tyler Lockett, I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about him as an underrated player. Then you've got Senior Bowl superstar Penny Hart, who I don't think has seen the field all that much, and then Freddie Swain, who I think had a pretty good catch the other week. So tell me about this receiving core, what they can do, what they specialize in. Are they kind of like a basketball team? You got a bunch of different skill sets, or do you have a bunch of people that do a lot of the same stuff, even if it happens in different ways?
I would say Tyler is underrated. I would say that 3 dudes, the most underrated title, you're right, it gets thrown around ridiculously. But I think the top 3 guys who that's a legitimate case for is Tyler Lockett, Robert Woods, and probably Allen Robinson are like 3 dudes where if they feel like they're the most underrated, I'm not going to tell any of them they're wrong because they are really damn good, and they just the love doesn't match how good they are at like pretty much everything. And I think one of the reasons that let Russ cook has really worked, and why Russ has had like great efficiency over the last like, well, his whole career, but definitely over the last like few years, is that his receivers are really efficient. Like they catch everything. Tyler Lockett's one of the most sure-handed players in the league. At least he was entering this year. Like David Moore is not a guy people know, but he catches everything. Like in 2017, 2018, he had a little section there where he didn't. Actually, against the Vikings, he was terrible in 2018. He had like 5 targets and no catches and like 2 drops. Like he was really bad. And he might have fumbled too. It was awful. But the point is now, like when you throw it to him, he catches it. Like Freddie Swain, you mentioned, the rookie. Every ball thrown Freddie's way, I'm pretty sure it's made it to his hands. I think he had one where he wasn't in bounds, and he had one where the play was blown dead and Russ threw it anyway, and he caught it. Like every time you throw it to Freddie, he catches it. I mean, that won't last forever, of course, but like having good hands has really been important for all these guys, and that sounds obvious because they're receivers, but Russ's guys have been like super, super, super efficient. That's why in 2018, when like Brandon Marshall had like 4 drops in like 3 games, he got cut. It was like, no, dude, you can be Brandon Marshall, future Hall of Famer or whatever, but if you don't catch the freaking ball, we will cut you. Like that's the thing that has to work in Seattle. You got to catch the rock. Tyler's really good at it. DK still struggles with it a little bit, but he's 6'4", runs 4.3, so he gets away with
so
it. Yeah,
some tolerances.
Yeah. Like David Moore though, like he's like that catch he had against Miami, the one he had against New England for a touchdown. Like he just makes some plays. Like where if you throw it to him, he'll go up and get it. He's that dude. So and the running backs are very similar. They catch. Chris Carson has really, really soft hands. Will Dissly didn't have a drop in college, I don't think. So I mean, Greg Olsen got off to a bad start by he had the ball go off his hands and turn into a pick 6. I don't think he's dropped anything since. So having good hands has really helped these guys because Russ is gonna trust you. Russ is gonna scramble. He's gonna like close his eyes and let that thing fire, and you just gotta catch it, and we'll have success. So I think that's like the number one quality of his group. They just catch everything.
That's so interesting because like when Russ was a rookie, the receiver core included Braylon Edwards, like notorious for drops. Golden Tate, who had an enormous drops problem in college. He's like one of the few receivers who's gotten better at it in the NFL. But, that and Sidney Rice, who, had super sticky hands in like 2009, but that's about it. That's like such a sea change from where the Seahawks used to be. Okay, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned that tight end group a little bit, and I think it's a pretty strange one. So there's like Luke Wilson, who's on again, off again with the Seahawks. It's like a weird relationship. Jacob Hollister, who for a 4th tight end does actually see the field. And then Will Dissly and Greg Olsen. And I don't really know what to make of this group.
Russ called them the best tight end group in the league, and I don't think that's the case. I don't really I'm not gonna lie. I don't know everybody's tight end depth.
Checking out the tight end depth charts, yeah.
Like I'm not really sure. I mean, I would guess a healthy Tampa Bay group.
Yeah, I was going to say before the OJ Howard injury, I would take because if Cameron Brate's your 3rd tight end, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, like that's probably I can't like I said, I can't think of a ton off the top of my head. I feel like the Ravens run like 5 tight end sets, so maybe they're up there as well. But he's saying that because a healthy Will Dissly is a stud. I don't know how well Disley's moving right now off of that Achilles tear that he had last October, but he's killed it to start the first 2 seasons of his career, and then he keeps getting hurt. So you got Greg Olsen, who's like a baller, who was able to put up decent numbers last year with really bad quarterback play. Like, good God, like it was bad last year after Cam had to dip out. You got Will Dissly.
You talking about the starter in Washington, that quarterback?
I can't believe Ron Rivera. Like a quick pivot. It's amazing what happens in the NFL. Like what familiarity will convince. Like it blinds guys in the NFL. It's like, I worked with you before, so this will work again. It's like there's a reason we're both in new situations. It's like this really works. Actually, like that always blows my mind. It's like, oh yeah, no, he's signing him because they work together in Miami. It's like, well, there's a reason neither one of you are in Miami anymore. You got fired and cut or traded. Like that. Think about that for a second. Like if I'm Ron Rivera, like there's a reason why. And I just saw somebody point this out. The last time he played Kyle Allen, like the last start, Rivera got fired after that, and it was against Washington, I think. So it's just like Rivera, that none of that makes any sense. But anyway, I think this group has a lot of potential. I think Jacob Hollister is like a starting tight end. Like he could be a tight end one. I think as long as you're willing to like lean more towards like a Jimmy Graham tight end one than like a George Kittle tight end one, because Jacob's not a super great blocker, but he's a really good route runner and he's got really good hands as well, which also makes the thing work with Russ. But yeah, they're probably not the best, but like if
Pretty deep though, huh?
yeah, no, it's probably like a top 5 group. Russ is probably not wrong about that. Like I don't think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
teams, as someone who's like struggles with the tight end waiver wire every year in fantasy, the tight end groups ain't deep. So for the Seahawks
Yeah.
to have 3 dudes who I think could legitimately be like number 1 tight ends on teams, like that's pretty good.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that offensive line. So, Dwayne Brown did not practice, as far as I can see. The Seahawks injury report is like a friggin' novel. It took a while for my phone to
Good
download
God,
it.
so long.
Yeah, but offensively, it's like DNP is only Dwayne Brown. So, I'm kind of curious what's going on there, whether or not you expect him to play. But pretty decent group so far, which is kind of a difference in terms of the way that we've talked about the Seahawks in the past. But Upati's having a good year. Ethan Postic's having a pretty great year. Brandon Shell isn't getting posterized, so that's a nice change at right tackle for the Seahawks. Yeah, I mean, what about this like offensive line group? Feels like it's been successful, and also is Dwayne Brown going to play? And if he doesn't, what does that mean?
I think first with Dwayne, I think he'll play. Like Dwayne's just kind of a warrior. He can just kind of play through damn near whatever. He's just on like there's a few guys in the Seahawks that are just on load management plans. That's just kind of how it goes. They actually use load management on the roster. On the injury report for the first time, they put load management on. I think DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Management. I was like, what the hell? But the offensive line, I'm not gonna lie. I'm really good at admitting what I don't know. I've been actually good at that at my job, like the last like year and a half, getting really, really, really good at it. O-line play is the one that I really go when I'm in the locker room sometimes, not this year, but I'll go up to dudes and like, hey man, I see that your PFF grade is bad. How do you feel about that? Like, let's just talk, and they'll be honest, like, oh no, they get this right, they get that right, or it really upsets me when the broadcaster says this, when really the call we had is this, and that's not my fault, blah, 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 blah. So, like, there's so many things that go into O-line play that, like, I would guess, like, 90% of us as reporters just really don't know what the hell is going on. I think we've only recently, like, accepted sacks as a quarterback stat, right? That's not solely on the O-line. So I think there's a lot of things that play with why the Seahawks O-line is competent. I think some of it is the guys playing well, for sure. I think that's part of it. The other part is Russ getting rid of the ball because, again, Russ has the ball, right? So he controls when he gets sacked. It's just like it's an obvious fact. I didn't really think about it like that till last year. I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. The guy who has the ball controls whether he gets sacked with it in his hands. Duh. So that's part of it. The other part I think is the holding penalties. Because there's been, you may know the percentage that's changed, but like the refs basically ain't calling them this year.
Yeah, no, they aren't. Yeah, it's down pretty significantly. I think it's like 1 holding penalty per game, less this year.
And that's insane. That's insane.
Yeah, that's enormous.
Years. Yeah. So like Jermaine Ifedi led the league in penalties and was like at least like top 5. Pretty sure 3 of the 4 years, or all of the 3 years he was a starter at right tackle. That he was like a super penalty prone player. Some of that was false start, some of that was holding. I do wonder how that's impacting offensive line play, specifically in Seattle that was plagued by penalties. Like, yeah, the guys weren't blocking well either, but they were also holding like Ifedi was. So like, would Ifedi thrive here? Like, I'm not sure. Is that what's helping Brandon Shell, who got benched last year in New York? So I think there's all of those things are at play. Guys playing well, refs easing up on the whistle on the flags there, and then Russ playing out of his mind. Like all of that's factoring in. Just like I think all of those things factored when the O line was quote unquote bad. It was guys who sucked. It was Russ holding on to the rock, pirouetting in the backfield, and then it was a bunch of penalties on holds that probably weren't really there. They had a holding penalty cost them a game against the Rams in 2018, like a phantom hold that took away points, and they ended up losing by like 2. So I mean, I think all of those 3 things are why Seattle's O line is like miraculously good after being pretty bad at pass protection for Russ's entire career.
Yeah, that's fair. And then let's talk a little bit about the running backs. Chris Carson's on the injury report limited, so it sounds like he'll play. You'll know about that a little bit more than I would, but this running back group doesn't seem kind of as interesting as it has in the past, right? Like sometimes, you had Rashad Penny, you get to talk about why, it's not working out for him, or you had, Thomas Rawls is really fun to talk about, an undrafted guy. Obviously, people got pretty excited about Kristen Michael, and then you had a Hall of Famer, Marshawn Lynch. Now it just feels like, yeah, they got some guys. What's kind of the character of this running back group?
I think, with the exception of their rookie DJ Dallas, who I haven't seen run the ball enough, I think it's just been 2 times. They got dudes who really just like violence, and that's just not. I don't know if that's the cool thing right now with running backs in the NFL. Honestly,
it's not in vogue. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know if running backs are even like cool, like right outside of like maybe like Zeke and Saquon. I mean, I guess McCaffrey's like kind of made some things cool, but for different reasons. Running backs are fade now. Like there was a time running backs were the stars of the NFL, and now they are very much like a second fiddle thing. Even if they are better than the quarterback, like Zeke may think he's better than Dak. Like Dalvin may think he's better than Kirk, or Christian McCaffrey is clearly better than his current quarterback, or I guess Christian's hurt. But
don't you talk about Teddy like that?
I do like Teddy, but yeah, no, he's Christian's the star, and I know Saquon thinks he's better than every quarterback he's had. But it doesn't matter. Like you can't be the star, and I think that's definitely the case in Seattle. But the identity of these guys is they really just like violence. Thomas Rawls isn't here anymore, but Thomas Rawls just liked running into people. Bobby Wagner talked about today. He said when he watches running backs, one of the first things he looks for is what happens when they get to the sideline. Do they go out of bounds? They lower their head, try to stay in. And the Seahawks have dudes who like to stay in. Like Chris Carson will run through your face. Carlos Hyde got hurt last year in like week 2 and was like, you know what? Here's how I'll play through it. If I just run through the other guy, then I won't have to think about the fact that my shoulder hurts. And was like, that's a super
all right, dude.
Yeah, that's not how that should go, but I understand it. Like warrior mentality. I get he ended up having a 1,000-yard season, so good for him. Like he likes running into people, and I think you kind of have to enjoy that part of football to
that's
do
true,
it at that level. Travis Homer's only probably 215 pounds, maybe their third string guy, and he likes running into people. He's also their kick returner, so all kick returners have to like violence. So I think that's kind of where we're at now. Rashad Penny's not really like that. He's a bit more finesse, and he's coming off the pup probably for after they come back from their week 6 bye. But right now, their top 3 dudes are all just like of the Marshawn Lynch like chain. Not in that they're as good as Marshawn, but they just like running through faces, which is kind of how you do like a starting running back in Seattle's offense. You got to like running through faces.
I'm going to put that running through faces video in the show notes. That's such a great video. All right, cool. Well, so I think that tells us, I think, a lot about the offense. Let's talk a little bit about the defense. This show's going a little bit slower than I thought, but there's so much fun stuff to talk about, so I hope you don't mind. Cool. So I'm looking at this injury list. We got Jamal Adams. You've already reported that he's not going to play against the Vikings. Then there's Nico Thorpe, who I think has already been put on IR, but he's on the injury report here.
Yeah, I don't know why he's on the injury report. Maybe it's just they forgot. I don't know. But yeah, he's on IR.
Quentin Dunbar did not participate because of knee. Jordan Brooks did not participate because of knee. KJ Wright, illness, did not participate. And then Lano Hill, somebody I don't know. I mean, I remember hearing his name in some draft, but safety back did not participate. And then you've got a bunch of limited, like Chico Griffin, shoulder limited, and so on. So how healthy is this unit come Sunday, do you think? I know you can't predict the future, but based off of like what you know, how healthy does this unit seem?
I honestly think without Jamal and Nico, because they've been ruled out or on IR, everyone that's named should play. Well, no. Jordan Brooks won't play.
Right.
Lano Hill's up in the air, but I think the Seahawks are not officially overcorrecting, because I think, to be honest, every NFL team's list could look like this. Like, dudes
Yeah.
are so beat up after these games. Like, maybe not by Wednesday. Maybe they feel fine by Wednesday. But if we put a camera on every NFL player, like Monday morning when they're trying to get out of bed after a game, like oh man, I can't imagine how many dudes have to have their wife help them out of bed, or just like moaning and groaning, limping to the shower or whatever. Like it's brutal. Football really hurts. But they've had some trouble with reporting injuries. I think one year they just didn't report Sherm's knee injury and got in trouble. 1 year, I think maybe it was last year, they had Tedrick Thompson wasn't on the injury report all year, and then just randomly went on IR the minute they traded for Quandre Diggs. I was like, that's suspicious. Yeah, like he just randomly needs shoulder surgery now that you have a better guy at free safety. Coincidence. He was hurt, but it's stuff like that. They didn't get in trouble for the T2 thing, but I think they've kind of understood, like, look, man, all right, if anybody says anything, they just put it on there. Screw it.
Right.
It doesn't matter. Nick's bruise, whatever, put it on there. So I think they're going to have long lists all year, I imagine. They won't have 26 players on it, I don't think. But that's part of it. I think a little bit of like an overcorrection. And the other thing is they like resting dudes. They did it with Marshawn Lynch. They did it with Michael Bennett. Did it with Doug Baldwin later in his career. They make it very clear, like, we'll do whatever you need to do to play Sunday. Sunday is what matters. Like if you get to a certain point in your career where you're a baller and you don't want to practice Thursday when we kind of like hitting each other a little more, then sure, you're good.
What I kind of like about that is you mentioned there's 2 on load management. That's DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But there's also Greg Olsen listed as resting vet, which you could just as easily just call load management if you wanted to. But they just put him on the injury report as like old. Like that was what they said.
It was the first 2 weeks. It was actually funny. DK was on there as a resting vet, and Greg Olsen was on there as a resting vet. And I was like, wow, man, that's a really good illustration of how much football hurts. Like it ages you in different ways. And I think it's funny because Greg Olsen played with Terrence Metcalf, DK's dad. That's how old Greg is.
Jeez.
They played in Chicago for like a year or two.
Wow.
Maybe? Yeah. Like that's that. But I took that as like, A, it was funny, but B, it was like football ages you. And someone else pointed out to me in my on Twitter that DK was called a resting vet after he played 100% of the team's offensive snaps. I was like, yeah, man, like,
hey, all right, yeah.
You play 100% of the snaps, you're going to be hurting come Wednesday. So, yeah, they rested him. So, yeah, they're going to – Tyler Lockett's resting vet. Greg's resting vet. They've had that designation for a while. They just now started using it, which is smart. Like, let the league know, like, look, he's fine. He's just old. And football hurts. Like, that's okay.
He's fine. He's just old. I'm gonna link some stories in the show notes about like just the stuff football players go through that you don't really. There's a great story about, I think it was Jason Taylor, who nearly had to have a leg amputated because of compression syndrome. Also a great story about an undrafted free agent linebacker for Atlanta, where he just kind of went through all of the injuries. Really fantastic stuff. So I'll link those in the show notes. Let's talk about the shape of the Seattle defense a little bit. So they're kind of known for creating kind of the cover 3 trend in the NFL, which isn't, entirely fair. I mean, like Ron Rivera and his disciples have run a bunch of cover 3. It looks a little bit different, but cover 3 is proliferated throughout the league. Some of the more flexible coordinators have also switched to cover 3. Mike Zimmer did cover 3 for a while until the last 2 years. Are they still doing it? Because I haven't done a ton of film study, but I have to kind of watch every game now that I'm doing some of this player of the week stuff. And it really feels like Seattle's doing like cover 2, cover 4 stuff a little bit more often. Has there been a change in their kind of defensive philosophy?
The philosophy hasn't changed. The personnel has, though. And I think I'm going to shout out Ted Wynn, our other colleague, who did a really good analysis of what happens to the assistant coaches that get hired away from Pete Carroll and how they fare in their new jobs. That's like Gus Bradley, Dan Quinn, Chris Richard, now Robert Saleh, Ken Norton, who left to go coach the Raiders. Like what these guys all experienced to in one way or another was like, man, it's really hard to replicate that stuff when I don't have Earl Thomas.
Yeah, the Earl Thomas thing is kind of important, huh?
Yeah, like you can't. I think, damn, someone just reported this. I think someone said like Dan Quinn would like when he got to Atlanta would like show guys like, all right, here's how we're gonna run our defense. Like he would show them Earl Thomas. Like that would be like how it would work. And someone I have to go find that. I'm pretty sure it was Dan, and they kind of pointed out. Someone hit me back and was like, or sent me the article and was like, man, if your defense needs Earl Thomas, you should probably just change the scheme. Like Earl Thomas is a once in a lifetime player, and I think Pete Carroll has, for the first time in his career with the Seahawks, had to realize that because he had Earl to start 2018. Earl broke his leg and flipped him off, but like he had him. Like that was the thing. And then 2019 was the first year he had to go through training camp without Earl Thomas, like that first time ever. So as a Seahawks head coach, so what you see now is a lot more cover two because he just can't trust the guys he's had to just stand back there and and play center field, which a lot of teams
patrol like 53 yards worth of green.
Yeah. A lot of guys can't do that. That's why you see cover twos and cover fours and softer coverages. And that's why you see some coordinators just like, look, man, our guys can't cover, so we're just going to send the house, the Todd Bowles special, or like what the Ravens do. The Ravens just send guys from everywhere and just try to create just madness. And I think it all works to some extent for certain people, unless you're the Cowboys and you just decide to not cover. But what's going on in Seattle is Pete's realized, like I think the last let's say 2 weeks have been a kind of good example. When Jamal Adams went down, they stopped running as much of their regular scheme and were like, look, we like Ryan Neal, but let's go back to our cover twos, and then let's have him buzz into the flat to make life a little easier on our guys. They still are still a cover three team, but there's only so much. You can't run that like 80% of the time like they were doing with Earl because they don't have Earl.
Right, yeah, fair enough.
Like other people made that work too, like Sherm and Cam Chancellor and Bobby, even Michael Bennett and Cliff Edwards providing the pressure. But the real thing was like, hey, we have the best safety in the league, so we're just going to run a scheme that has him erase everyone else's mistakes, and he did. And they don't have that now. So, yeah, they still run. I would guess they probably run it still like 60% of the time. But Pete Carroll and Ken Norton have had to like humble themselves and be like, look, this ain't the LOB. It's a good group, but we don't have Earl, so we're not going to do that.
Oh, that's fair. I find it kind of interesting because Pete was originally, I think, like USC, Jets, Patriots. He was like a Tampa 2 guy, which, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I think there's like a Monty Kiffin connection way back in the coaching history. And Pete's like 70, so there's
really.
Yeah, so it's there, but like I guess he wanted to move in a cover three direction because he wanted all the stuff that Tampa 2 gives you, but without relying on a linebacker to be like Brian Urlacher, essentially. So yeah, I guess, I mean, he does have like flexibility and adaptation in his DNA. He just kind of had to rediscover it. Well, let's talk about some of the individual personnel. So I think, for most teams, when I do this, we start with the defensive line first. But I think for the Seahawks, it's always appropriate to start with that secondary because I feel like that's just kind of what's defined them, even if kind of that linebacker core is more fundamentally interesting. Let's talk about that secondary. So no Jamal Adams. So what happens at safety without Jamal Adams? What does that look like?
They'll start Ryan Neal, an undrafted guy, third-year dude. I have a profile on him running Thursday morning. He's an interesting cat. He got started with Atlanta, only played on special teams, played last year with the Seahawks in 3 games, only on special teams. And then this year he gets called up because of the new rule that you can call up guys. And then Jamal Adams gets hurt against Dallas, and they're like, hey, Ryan, we need you to go in and like the game's on the line. So don't mess up. Like, all right, coach, got it.
No pressure.
Goes in there, and then intercepts Dak in the end zone to end the game. And then Jamal's hurt, so like, hey Ryan, we need you to actually start this week. His first ever start, and he picks off Ryan Fitzpatrick on the first play or their first passing play, I believe. So like Ryan, and in the feature, I learned that Ryan's one of those dudes that he's not like been highly touted his whole career. Like he's not like a Jadeveon Clowney, I would say. And that like Jadeveon was the number 1 high school player, the number 1 overall pick. Like things have always gone his way for the most part. Ryan, he's one of those dudes. He needs things to not go his way, and that motivates him, whether he wants to admit that or not. Like he lost his job in. It's a fun fact. He lost his job in college to Jeremy Chin, actually at Southern Illinois.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, yeah. So he got benched. I talked to his DB coach. His DB coach was like, "Yeah, Ryan wasn't making the plays I needed him to. I knew he could make them because he's an NFL guy, but I was like, I benched him, put him right next to me, and I put in Jeremy Chin, and that turned Ryan up. Like he was like, you know what? I got to search inside myself and figure out what I'm doing wrong. Ended up getting the other. He beat out the other safety, so he and Jeremy Chin were the two starters in 2017 for Southern Illinois, and then they both ended up being pros. And his college that prepared him for his college career, or excuse me, for his pro career. So now, the first obstacle in college was, okay, I got benched. In the pros, it was, now I can't get off the bench. I'm on practice squads. But that was the motivation he needed, and now he's in a starting role, getting ready to make his second start of his career on a Sunday Night Football. So I actually think he's going to be all right. He's going to be a decent. He's not Jamal, but like he has the chance to prove that he's a fringe starting safety in the league, which is crazy. And then they'll have Quandre Diggs back there, who any people in the NFC North know. Like he's a pretty damn good player in Detroit. Trading him for a 5th-round pick was like, good God, like, are you guys tanking for Tua? Like, I don't know what Detroit
clearly a locker room. Yeah, it's like, well, he's either going somewhere or nowhere. So otherwise, he's just not gonna. It's like a Carson Palmer kind of trade, but you don't get 1st-round picks for safeties anymore. It's 5th-round pick, just kind of wild because we know he's good. Well, yeah, God, man, I didn't know that he was an SIU guy. They must have had the smartest pair of safeties in the FCS then. Jesus.
Yeah, no, I was looking up just like before we hopped on here, like how good was that secondary in 2017 at SIU? Because like, yeah, they had 2 NFL safeties and an FCS defense. Like they must have been nasty. I mean, it makes sense when they both made the pros too. I'm surprised their DB coach is still the DB coach because that's the type of thing you would think he gets poached.
Yeah, it gets you promoted real fast.
Yeah, no, he's still there, but yeah, no, that was that was a very interesting backstory I learned about Ryan. I was glad to write about that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, that cornerback group is also kind of interesting to me. So Quentin Dunbar, we don't know if he's going to play yet. I think you said Shaquille Griffin coming off a pretty good game. I asked you actually 2 weeks ago whether or not I should feature him, and he's like, no, he got toasted. So clearly didn't have a great pair of games recently, but fundamentally a pretty good corner. I thought he probably played better last year, but fundamentally a good player. Trey Flowers would be, I think is going to be playing either way, right? Because in a nickel package, he's just always going to be out there. But what happens if you don't have Quentin Dunbar, and how good is this cornerback group? Not compared to the LOB, but just like against the NFL in general.
Well, so far it's actually been really bad. They're giving up. They're like 29th in like passing defense DVOA. It's like really terrible.
The over-under for this game is 57.5. It's the most explosive passing offenses in the NFL. Somehow the Vikings are there. And some pretty explosive passing defenses, if you will.
Yeah, no, I think the Seahawks are still leading the league in like because I think every team defines explosive pass plays by 16 yards or more. I know the Seahawks do. I think they still lead the league with like 40 of them giving up like 4 weeks. I think it's like 44. Maybe they went into the Dolphins game with 33, which led the league by a lot. Like it was more than the Cowboys, and then they came out of it, I think, at like 40. So yeah, no, they're still struggling a little bit there in that regard. But Shaquille is a good player. I think I've kind of learned that when people say like you interview players after the game and they won't tell you what's wrong, and they say like, oh man, we just need everybody to do their job, and you just walk away like, that's so vague. What the hell are they talking about? Like, of course. Like, duh. What if you're not doing your job, what else are you doing? And then the more I've learned that in this scheme, like sometimes you get guys who get burnt, like Shaquille did against the Cowboys, when they're really trying to cover for someone else or not trusting that someone else can make the play. So then they're out of position themselves. Like, I think because these guys all just want to be great. They want to get the ball in their hands, and they can do that. I think the last time Trey Flowers played the Vikings, he picked off Kirk. So, like, they can get the ball in their hands, they've just been really inconsistent. That's the problem. And I think I need to count the number of snaps that their top 4 DBs have played together. I think Shaquille, Quentin Dunbar, Quandre, and Jamal have only played maybe the equivalent of 1 game together. Because in week 1, Trey Flowers and Quentin were alternating, which was dumb on Pete Carroll's part, but whatever. In week 2, Quandre got kicked out after 9 plays. And then in week 3, Quentin was hurt, and then Jamal got hurt. And then now Jamal's out. And even if Quentin comes back, there's still no Jamal. So, like, the foursome that they spent all of camp with trying to figure out if they were the dudes, they've played maybe 1 game out of the 4 together. So they probably won't look super good. Like, Kirk's probably going to hit some big deep balls. He's probably going to – I'll put the over-under on Kirk passing yards at like 335 or something like that. Like, it's going to be somewhere around there. Kirk's going to sling it. They're going to give up plays. They're probably going to be sitting back, making sure he tries to get nothing deep and then just rally to Dalvin Cook. But the thing about Pete Carroll's defense playing against Kirk, they found a way to get the ball away from Kirk, and they found a way to like stifle some of his number ones. I think in 2018, these guys just were all over Thielen and Diggs. I think that's the game that got the Vikings OC fired, actually.
It was, yeah. The Thielen was double covered and Diggs was triple covered for a good chunk of snaps, which does not seem possible. But when you only send 2 receivers into routes, it's pretty easy.
I think Kirk said after the game that one play the Seahawks had 9 guys in coverage or something crazy like that. I went back and I couldn't find the play, but maybe that's just maybe it was 8 guys and he's miscounting, but. Yeah, you're right. They were just triple and double covering the 2 best players. Maybe they'll do that again and force, I don't know, whoever the third person is to go off. That would kind of be my guess, because they've decided that, like, the person who's not going to beat us is Thielen or Diggs. And so after they watch some Justin Jefferson footage, they're probably going to be like, all right, cool. We won't let this guy beat us either because he's damn good.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about that linebacker group. So, unfortunately, we're not going to get much more on Jordan Brooks, who I think is a really fascinating draft prospect because he wasn't sent into coverage all that much in college. So kind of what can he do? But it sounds like he's just not going to be able to play. So you've got KJ Wright, Bobby Wagner, Cody Barton played a pretty big role. What can we expect from this group? It's KJ Wright's coming off of this like really phenomenal game, but it doesn't feel like the KJ Wright I remember or Bobby Wagner that I remember. Is this just because the defense isn't as good and so they just don't get the accolades they deserve, or are they actually kind of playing a little bit slower now? What's the deal?
No, I think the defense is changing a little bit. The Seahawks run defense is really good. They fixed that part.
It's like number 2 in rush EPA allowed or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're really just holding teams down, and it's part of it is because teams have found it's a lot easier to just throw on them, which it is. But even when they do decide to run, they suck at it. Like both things can be true at once. Like whether you got Ezekiel Elliott or even Myles Gaskin kind of held him down. Todd Gurley, they've made it. I mean, even like Cam Newton in that offense wasn't really running all over. Like they've shut down everybody. I think the linebackers have played a big part in that. The big thing with the Seahawks linebackers is they're vets. They're in year 9 and 10 with Bobby and KJ respectively, and they just know when stuff's coming. And they've really worked on their pass coverage a lot. I think KJ last year had a career high in pass breakups with 11. Who else had? I think he had a career high in interceptions. I think Bobby Wagner. I hate to ask him at Pro Football Focus this, because I swear they had him giving up like 700 yards at the end of the year. And then I remember checking to do like a preview thing during camp, and it was like way less than that. It might have been like 200. And I'm just like, what kind of stat correction is this? Like, I don't know. I gotta ask somebody about that, because I thought Bobby was actually good in pass coverage last year. I think they're shaping up to be like the best pass defending linebacking core in the league. As long as KJ doesn't drop interceptions like he did on Sunday, like they're going to get their hands on some passes. I still think Bobby's the best linebacker in the league. I know there may be some guys in Tampa Bay and Minnesota who make great cases, but yeah, I still think it's Bobby, and part of it is his smarts. Like the best, I give you the best example. against the Patriots in week 2. Final play of the game, Jamal Adams goes into the huddle and he tells KJ, he's like, KJ, I'm about to jump over the pile. Because that's what he thinks Cam Newton's going to do on the goal line to win the game, you know? And KJ's like, really? You sure? Why would you do that? He's like skeptical of that being the play call. And then Bobby tells everybody in the defense, he's like, guys, the ball's going to our right. Like, so slant line, we need you to slant to the right. Everyone just break right because that's where Cam's going. And then what do you know? Cam runs to the offense's left, which is the defense's right, and they blow the play, flip Cam, game over. Like Bobby doesn't end up making the play like himself. I think Lano Hill and LJ Collier ended up physically tackling Cam Newton, but none of that happens if Bobby doesn't tell them where the play is going on the most important play of the game. Like that's what makes Bobby so great. Like he just knows what's about to happen. So he doesn't need to be the fastest or the strongest. If he's there when you're there, he's gonna make it happen. So like you're probably gonna see a lot of that. We won't know it until after the game, but I bet you we see a lot of that on Sunday where a run gets blown up or a screen pass gets destroyed by KJ or Bobby, and it's just like, well, yeah, they knew as soon as Kirk walked out the huddle that that's what they were running, and like that's what makes those two really special.
All right, cool. That was a lot, man. Yeah, actually, that Cam play I think is really interesting because when I didn't put Bobby Wagner my players of the week that week, a bunch of people got pretty upset, told me about Bobby Wagner making that call. So I guess it's already entered Seahawks lore, even though it's kind of just a regular season game. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about this defensive line then. So Poona Ford, the smallest nose tackle you'll ever see, was really great at Texas. Surprised he didn't get drafted. Unsurprising that he's playing well in the NFL. LJ Collier, first round pick, doesn't seem to be playing like one, but it's an interesting, I think, defensive line group because it feels like it's built to stop the run, and then they're just kind of asking them to rush the passer rather than kind of the other way around. Benson Mayowa, I think it was a waiver wire pickup. I think he was that young when they grabbed him from Las Vegas. And then Alton Robinson, who just made Dame Brugler's honorable mention for, or runner-up for rookies through the quarter pole of the season at edge rusher. So tell me what you feel about this group and whether or not I'm wrong. Oh, and they just added Jonathan Bullard, I think, too, former Chicago Bear.
Yeah, it's a group that hasn't really produced. Like that's people don't want to talk about it, but I think that's
they don't want to talk about it.
Well,
it's a dirty secret in Seahawks Twitter.
Well, it's in Seattle. They definitely want to talk about it, but I think if you just isolate the D line, because the pressure, if you look at the pressure rates, the sack numbers, like their raw sack numbers are fine. I think their pressure numbers are fine. Their pass rush win rate numbers are fine. But like, okay, do all those numbers again and take Jamal Adams out. Well, then all the numbers stink for the most part. So, I mean, maybe they don't now because Jamal's been out for a little bit, but they're so reliant on blitzing. They're like a top 10 blitz frequency team. Like they do a lot of blitzing at the quarterback to generate pressure. And that's because their guys are just not winning those matchups. I don't even know how many sacks their defensive ends have. I probably can count right now. Benson Mayowa has 1, and Alton Robinson has 1. I think that's it. I think that's their entire edge group's sack production is 2. Like that's not good enough. Right? It's not. Like, that's not a Pete Carroll. I can't even recognize this Pete Carroll Seahawks team. Other than having a physical running back group, they're throwing it all over the place, and they can't stop anybody from passing it on them, and their front four isn't getting any pressure. It's like, what the hell kind of 4-0 Seahawks team is this? But I do think once they get the help from the back end that they need, once they get that foursome that I mentioned, that Shaq, Quentin, Diggs, and Jamal, once that group of 4 people play together, it's going to help the rush out. But until then, I don't know how well this group is going to – they just don't have a guy. Every group needs a guy that's going to tear it up and, like, make life easier for everyone else. And for these guys, that's Jamal in the secondary. And until Jamal in the secondary get together and help them out, this will be an underwhelming front line. Even if guys have talent, like LJ has talent, first-round pick, Alton Robinson has talent, he's worked with Cliff Averill in the offseason, who's like a master of the sack fumble. Like there's guys who have some talent, but right now the production is just not there. And I don't really know if it will be, even up against like who would you say the Vikings have like the worst right guard like in the league? I don't even know if they'll have it this week.
They'll find a way. Everybody who has gone up against the Vikings interior line, whoever their best interior defender is, has a career game. I think it was DeForest Buckner's best game. I think happened in like week 3, and then no, it was week 2, and then week 3 was Jeffrey Simmons' best game of his career, which short career, so who knows. It's a pity we don't get to see more of Demontre Moore. I love it when my AAF and XFL guys go off, but he'll probably be inactive, right?
Ooh, yeah, probably. I don't. That's a good question. They have Snacks Harrison too. They just signed
right,
him
yeah.
to the squad, and he'll probably get elevated. But yeah, obviously people are tweeting pictures of him right now. That's a nose tackle if I ever seen one. Good. Oh man.
Yeah, he's a little more pear shaped than I remember.
Yeah, I didn't know what shape he was, and I just knew he was big. And as I seen him today, I was like, oh man, that's
big.
You ain't moving that dude. Like maybe he'll be the guy who has the career day.
That's true. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe he gets 2 pressures, man. That'll be pretty interesting for him.
Yeah, no, that's Kirk Cousins gonna need an ice bath if that dude sacks him. Good God,
All right, that was pretty exhaustive, but I don't know, man. This is a pretty fun conversation, so hopefully it didn't seem too bad on your end. Before we go, any final thoughts you want to give? Otherwise, game prediction if you want.
I think the Seahawks will win probably something like 36-30. I think both teams will give up a lot of points. Take the over. I take the Vikings to cover.
It sounds like the Vikings are covering.
Yeah, it got bet down to 7. It'll probably get bet down some more, to be honest. But yeah, if
you think so, really?
I think that the Seahawks injury report scares bettors. Seeing all those guys. Probably like Seahawks entire line is on the injury report, so we'll see. That's tough. No Jamal Adams. That could maybe that might be worth half a point. I'm not sure. Don't gamble, ladies and gentlemen. That's just not. It's not a good thing.
Vikings will cover, but do not gamble. All right. Also, they'll hit the over, but don't gamble.
I'm predicting a sack from someone who doesn't have one. That's gonna be my kind of bold pick. I think you know what? I'll go real. I think we'll get one from a DB. I think we'll get one from Shaq Griffin. Might have him a sack on Sunday.
Does that mean both Shaq Griffins will have had sacks then?
Has Shaquem no, Shaquem hasn't had one. He's had like a QB hit. He'll play. Shaquem should play, but I don't think he'll have one. They combined for one against Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs, which was like the most storybook thing I think I've ever covered. Is twin brothers, one of them who does not have a hand, combining for a sack of Aaron Rodgers in a playoff game.
That's pretty wild, yeah.
Yeah, no, if they had won, it would have been a much bigger deal. They ended up losing, so it was like, who cares? But that moment, when they did the fourth quarter too, so when they did that, I was like, oh my God, if they win, like this is gonna be like a Disney special. If
Football Reference doesn't list a regular season sack for him, but he does have he's credited for actually 1.0 sacks in that game.
In the Packers game?
Yeah.
Oh wow, they took away the sack from his twin brother. Oh wow.
Yeah, wow, that's rough, man.
Yeah, you need those. I think Shaquille has like one in his career. I think he got one against Dallas in his rookie year. But yeah, I think this might be Ken Norton. He knows how to dial up a sack, man. I think Trey Flowers had 2 last year, coming from the right cornerback spot. So yeah, we'll see.
That'll be fun to see. I mean, not for Vikings fans, but like just generally, it'd be fun. I don't know. I like watching weird defenses. Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We'll link a couple of your stories in the show notes. But you said you had a story coming up on Thursday.
Yeah, I just followed my Ryan Neal little mini feature. Steve has it, so it should run Thursday morning. We got him on Zoom today, so I told Steve, I was like, hey, everyone's gonna write about Ryan, so I'm gonna make sure mine's already done. Because I already had all the background, like all that stuff I just told you about Jeremy Chin. No one else already knew that. I had to do some prior research. So yeah, that's dropping on Thursday. Oh, that's tomorrow.
Cool. Well. Yeah, well, it's tomorrow as of this recording. We'll be recording the rest of the show on Thursday. So it'll already have been published by the time we publish, so we'll be able to include it in the show notes and all that. So no worries.
Oh yeah, there we go. That's tight. Yeah, that'll be fun. I don't know how good Ryan is, but I did like that. Learning what makes him tick was really cool because he almost quit football. You know, practice squad grind sucks. So him
Yeah, that's
finally
fair,
getting a
man.
shot. Yeah. Well, yeah. Pete Carroll made a good point today. He was like, we should keep this rule even after like COVID kind of like isn't controlling our sport because like it's different for those practice squad guys during the week. Now they're all practicing knowing that they could get called up. In previous years, they're just running into each other, getting really expensive cardio. That's it. That's all they're doing.
Right.
No one sees it but their coaches, and they don't never get really called up. You know, it's like being in the
And
G League. Now
there's some names on this practice squad, man. I remember some of these guys. Obviously, Demarius Randall and Snacks Harrison, but like Tim Williams, I remember him. Danny Etling, John Ursua, he got a bunch of preseason hype. I remember that. Michael Divinity, wow, this
yeah, they
is a
just
group.
signed him. Yeah, though they got some dudes on their practice squad. I think they have like a couple high draft picks, former ones, on their. I don't know where Snacks was picked, but I think Demarius was like a first round pick.
Yeah, first or second. Tim Williams is I think a second round pick. You got another LSU tight end, Stephen Sullivan, on here. Pretty
Yeah, no,
interesting stuff.
the new rule, I'm a big fan of it. Not
Yeah,
just not because of the flexibility for the players, but I like what Pete said. Like, it's a mental thing. These dudes are practicing knowing they can play potentially. That's just a whole different motivation if you're just going
for
through the
sure.
motion, knowing that on the when all your buddies are out there like balling on on the big stage, living out their dream, you're just in a hoodie. No one sees you. Like it's hard to stay motivated each week when that's your reality. So
Yeah,
they get the best out of their guys when they actually feel like they have something to play for.
love it, man. Hey, thanks so much for coming on, man.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first thing that we're going to tackle out of the mailbag is the COVID situation. We got a couple of questions on this, so we're just going to end up kind of lumping them all together here. Duke's Code asks, how do we navigate the blame for the Titans situation? I feel too many people are calling out the players more than the organization. They shouldn't have practiced, but honestly, many of these guys are one bad play or injury from losing a career, so of course they acted as such. Joey asks, any chance the Titans get the death penalty, forfeiture of games this year? Not the same thing. For such a flagrant flouting of the NFL's safety rules. And can the Vikings get that L moved to a W? Don from Ohio is also asking a question on this. If Arif was the NFL commissioner, what punishment would he give the Titans? Forfeited games, player suspension, draft picks taken away, shooting coaches into the sun? That was mine. So the COVID situation, as far as the Titans are concerned, is an ever-evolving situation because it turns out that the players organized practices, plural, outside of when they were told specifically not to be doing that. And even players that didn't attend these practices are still coming down with it and testing positive. And multiple games now have had to be moved as a result of the COVID situation for the Titans not getting any better. And everybody likes to poke fun at the idea that, oh yeah, we thought that there'd be some team that wouldn't take this seriously, but we all thought it would be from Florida. Fine. But this is actually happening. This is happening out of Nashville and is causing a big problem in scheduling to the point where there was an unconfirmed report that the NFL was looking at winning percentage instead of games to be something that goes into deciding if a team makes the playoffs.
Yeah, so it's really complicated, right? Because if you forfeit games, then you have to make a decision about whether or not, that shows up as a win or a loss in the record of the team that would have played the Titans, right? Because like if the Bills get to go 5-0 while playing 4 games, that's unfair to other people that are competing for a number 1 seed, right? And that's really important because there's going to be only one playoff bye this year. And so that's part of the consideration. So at some point, you have to kind of acknowledge that the resolution to this, you're going to have to try and be as fair as possible, which doesn't mean that the resolution is going to be fair. So you kind of have to start with that in mind, that maybe the best solution will screw somebody, because sometimes situations are just like that. They're just so bad that you can't really find a situation where it's everybody kind of comes out ahead. So that's kind of part of it. But I do think that there's probably ways around it. I think that the idea that for the purposes of playoff seeding, if you do end up, choosing the forfeit route, I think for the purposes of playoff seeding, I think win percentage is a better way to do that. And so you don't hand a win to the Bills, for example, is what everyone's talking about, because that's the upcoming game and that's the one they would have to forfeit. So yeah, you would do that by win percentage. I would say also, if you're a Steelers fan or a member of the Steelers, you would say, hey, if the Bills don't have to play that game, if they don't have to risk injury, for 1 week, why do we have to play the rescheduled game? We're not the ones that screwed up. Michael Bolton's the one who sucks. Why should I change my name? Right?
Exactly. And there's a question as to whether or not players end up getting checks on a forfeited game as well.
Right. Yeah. So that's another question too. And so the way that and I saw this come up, and some people were like, "Oh, the NFLPA is a joke," and like maybe, but the NFLPA actually, I think, did probably a better job than you'd expect navigating with the NFL as we got into the season, because they're the reason that salaries just didn't get slashed and remarkably entering the season. So part of that agreement is that if there are games that are canceled, that the players wouldn't be getting game checks for that. But that kind of fell under the assumption, right, that a lot of teams, or the season or the rest of the season, would be canceled, right? And then there's no revenue coming in, so you can't pay out the players. This is a little bit different. There's less revenue coming in, but it just feels like this is a situation where the rest of the league can probably subsidize at least the Bills, right? If the team that forfeits gets game checks, it maybe feels maybe not as right. But yeah, I think in this situation, there's a lot of latitude given to the Steelers and the Bills. And again, we're probably more likely talking about the Bills here, because the Steelers game seems like a lot easier to reschedule. They've already got kind of a plan in place, sort of, for that. But yeah, you would want to provide game checks or some sort of stipend, right? Maybe you don't give out the full game check, maybe give out what's equivalent to the playoff check, because I don't know if people know this, but like when you get to the playoffs, everybody gets paid the same. And it's just like a playoff stipend, essentially, that gets added onto your salary. It kind of sucks. But you could just do that, right? So that's, I think, maybe, a solution. I think maybe somewhere in between there, right, would probably be the best way to do it if you have to keep on doing it. But the NFL has to make a decision now, and then they have to be consistent about that decision going forward, which is the problem, right? So if they have to cancel future games, they're going to be losing out on a lot of revenue opportunities, and it's going to be more and more difficult to subsidize for the rest of the league, or the rest of the revenue sources, to subsidize game checks for those canceled games. So let's say they have to cancel this Bills game. Well, in this situation, it's very easy for us to say, hey, they'll just get their full game check. This is kind of like a weird one-off thing. I know that we agreed to this with the NFLPA, but right now that doesn't seem fair, right? But then kind of later on, another team has an outbreak, and then they have to cancel 3 games, and then you have to figure out game checks for those 3 games, and now you've gone from having 256 games to 252, and maybe you get to 250, and now the money is getting a little bit tighter. And I know that sounds kind of weird, given kind of the massive profit margins that the NFL operates on, but that's how the NFL is going to argue it, and that's how they're going to see it, and it becomes a more and more credible argument the more games you cancel down the road. Maybe you have to cancel games, weeks 15 to 17 or something like that, right? And in that case, that's a lot of games, right, that you have to cancel. And that's a lot of revenue that you don't get. And that's, now that you've established a precedent of paying out full game checks for canceled games early in the season, now a bunch of teams will have canceled games through no fault of their own because somebody else messed up. Or, it's a virus, right? Nobody has to necessarily mess up for something to go wrong. Now nobody messes up, and now a bunch of people have to lose a lot more money than at the beginning. So that's something you have to navigate, and that becomes really difficult. I think in order to kind of resolve that, you probably want to go somewhere in the middle between the checks that you get for the playoffs and the prorated game check that people are already getting. Kind of meet somewhere in the middle on everybody's salary there, and kind of have a quick agreement with the NFLPA hammered out within the next week or so on that question. So that's one thing with regards to game checks. In regards to like playoff seeding and stuff, I think winning percentage is the best way to go about it. Again, if you're a team that plays 16 games and you lose your 16th game, it could feel kind of stupid, right? That you won, more games than this other team, and this other team is above you in the playoff seedings because you lost the 16th game, and it's like a game that you wouldn't have had to play if you had the same number of games as them. But it's the closest thing I think you can get to fair. Now, with regards to kind of who's to blame and how to dole out punishment in regards to the answer to that question, I think Duke's Code actually raises up a really good point, which there's a couple of kind of sub points to this, which is that the NFL, I don't think, did a very good job of communicating, whether or not the Titans would be expected to play on Sunday and what they would be able to do in order to kind of stay healthy and active in practice and work out and go through their game plan and their game planning reps for the game. And so when Roger Saffold admitted to being at that workout, when he tweeted out that the reason we're out there is because we've got livelihoods and, we, like Duke's Code said, we're like one injury away from not having a career or a paycheck to take care of our families. That, I think, is actually fairly relevant. The pressures that exist for them to produce exist whether or not they get to practice, and their ability to practice is a really significant part of their ability to perform. I said it on another podcast or another radio show I was on actually earlier today or yesterday in regards to a question about whether or not the Vikings should tank. And so, my answer to that was that that is fundamentally a theoretical question because it is going to be difficult without assurance from the ownership to ask Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman to tank, and especially the players to tank, when every game is an interview for your job, the job that you keep. Because the way the competitive pressures of the NFL, so it's very easy to get rid of players who underperform, and especially coaches who underperform. And so if every game is an interview, right, and the difference between 9-7 and 8-8 can determine whether or not you're hired or fired, right? Or if you give up like 4 sacks, and remember what happened when Adrian Claiborne sacked Dak Prescott through Chaz Green like 6 times in one game, right? It was incredible, right? And he used the same move every time. Well, Chaz Green is no longer in the NFL, and Adrian Claiborne got an enormous contract as a result of one game. And there could have been all sorts of things that explain that. But at the end of the day, if Roger Saffold gives up 4 sacks, right, his next contract is going to look a lot worse just because of one game. And so there's a ton of pressure on them in combination with the lack of communication about what is allowed for them. And so then the next question becomes, what did the NFL tell them? When did they tell them? And when did they organize these workouts? So my understanding is that for this first workout, and the timeline on this is kind of murky. So I'll try to look this up after the show and post it in the show notes if I get this wrong. But from my understanding, the NFL officially released a memo that came out later after the workout that the first workout that the players organized, indicating that they could not do this. So that would kind of imply that the Titans did not violate any rules. But before that, evidently the NFL told in a conversation with Mike Vrabel that Titans players would not be able to organize a workout, or they would not be able to, I think it was gather outside of the facility, right? And so, then you have to ask the question, did Vrabel communicate this to the rest of the team? Because if he didn't, right, then I actually have a difficult time believing for at least that first workout that, some of those players should be held culpable for that. Because if they're not told that they can't do that, but they're told that they're told every day that they're going to be liable for the performance that they have on Sunday, then you kind of will assume that maybe that they'll try to work out. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that, like, it kind of makes sense that you wouldn't be able to do that. Like, why were we shutting down the facility?
Yeah, all workplaces are dealing with a similar situation. If you work at Taco Bell and somebody in there tests somebody that like works there that you've been working with in close contact, regardless of whether or not you're wearing masks, gets COVID and they you're traced and you're told to stay home for 2 weeks or whatever, you're closed and you're told not to go out and associate with the other people that potentially had COVID. Like, that's the way that it's working in every other business across America right now. You are told to stay home and not not associate with the people.
It's intuitive that you should not do it.
No, it's
right.
It's complete common sense.
And so that's like the other part of it is like, okay, maybe they weren't told specifically by the NFL, but like, dude, like you're organizing. I guess it's not they didn't really do much to keep it secret. Like they did it at Montgomery Bell Academy, which is a high school. Which I don't know if anyone who's listening to this podcast is familiar with high schools, is full of teenagers, and teenagers will never shut up. So I like it's not really a secret. I guess Clay Travis's son forced Clay Travis to promise secrecy about this. Which Clay Travis's son as a kid, I'm not gonna like all high schoolers suck, so I'm not gonna single him out for being crappy. But Clay Travis should probably have just violated his teenager's trust and just been like, "Hey, so the Titans are practicing, man. That's kind of screwy, right?"
Yeah, if you're looking at like clandestine high school football situations where NFL players have been on, like the only one that anyone was able to keep a secret about was Peyton Manning. Like other than that,
that's right.
If you're like if you're other than that, like if you're a pro football person and you're at a high school, guess what? All of them are on social media. All of them have phones. Everything that you do right. over there is going to be documented.
Right. And I think Paul Kuharski, who now operates his own independent website covering the Tennessee Titans, he, I guess, recovered some of those photos, right? So you can kind of identify which players were at practice. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that they were at some point told that they couldn't do this, and then they continued to do it, right? And so at that point, you definitively go. So I think before you could maybe ambiguously say like, well, the players violated like common sense, and that's unethical and awful. But from an organizational standpoint, if no one told them not to, it's difficult to punish them. You go from that to now it's no longer an organizational responsibility, right? Because I think the NFL still bears some responsibility for, creating an environment over the past 60 years that has these competitive pressures, which, that's not a problem in itself, but then not providing some assurance about how they can or what their expectations are come Sunday, how they can prepare for that. Maybe they bear some responsibility for that. But after they tell them that you cannot do this and then they do it, it shifts from organizational responsibility down to the players. And I think there still should probably be some sort of discussion from the NFL to the players about this relationship, this tension between your inability to prepare for, next week's interview, essentially, and what we're asking you to do to kind of protect the league, right? Because now you're working where there's two sets of incentives here, and organizationally you have to do something to resolve these sets of incentives. And if you don't do that, you're not doing a very good job as an organization.
When the NFL said that they were looking at the tapes to see where there had been problems with the Titans' response as far as like people walking around without masks and everything, I was like, oh, good, the NFL's got tapes. I was just curious if TMZ had acquired it first, because the NFL just does not have a good history of acquiring things until it's just a little bit too late.
Yeah, right, exactly. They're still investigating. Like the NFL has not finished their investigation. So now there's multiple investigations, right? Because they're still going through the tapes to see if anyone violated a protocol at the Titans facility. But then also now they're going to have to do all the stuff with Montgomery Bell Academy, which, side note, I just always have a negative association with MBA, Montgomery Bell Academy, because there's this private school in Tennessee that they run this like super exclusive invitational debate tournament. And I never got invited. So, screw you guys.
So now you're dunking on them on a podcast 10 years later.
Yeah, I don't hold grudges, man.
No.
Also, it's much longer than 10 years later. It's like 16 years later. Also, like in retrospect, I probably should not have been invited. So it doesn't really matter. But screw you guys.
God, you sound like Dusty complaining about the treatment he got in Watertown when he was in debate.
I was not one of the top 72 teams in the country. I just wanted to be. So that's, but Yeah. So there's definitely a level of organizational responsibility. If the NFL said, we'll pay you to not practice, maybe that would be something, but then you have to figure out and this is kind of one of those things where the government sometimes subsidizes farmers not to grow particular crops, and that feels really wonky, right? But that's just an effort to prevent, flooding the market with a particular crop. There's a whole extra high level reason that actually makes a ton of sense when you evaluate it. But at the lowest level is just wait, they get literally paid for doing nothing? That's screwy. But from a policy perspective, it's actually a pretty good idea. And so if the NFL had provided some, will give you, some money to just not practice, just don't do anything. God.
Work from home, please.
Right. That probably would have been better, even if it feels more unfair, because it would have resolved some of the tensions that exist, the two cross incentives that they have, right? Individual players have an incentive to work in order to make sure that they can perform on Sunday. The NFL has an incentive to not let them work, because the more they work, the more they spread a virus that could shut down the NFL. There's all of that. That I think plays a role. Now, how do you punish the Titans in light of the fact that it kind of makes sense that the players individually have an incentive? Well, if a player had participated in that first practice, but not any subsequent practices, I would absolutely take that into account when I determined punishments. So I think that's important too, because then it's more official guidance or guideline from the NFL that they're violating in this instance. So I think that's important. I think any player that continued to engage in workouts after that first workout, I think you give them pretty heavy fines. And like always, I think any fine in the NFL should be a sliding scale based off of how much money you make in the NFL, right? Because I'm a dirty socialist, but also it makes a ton of sense, right? You fine Rob Gronkowski, the highest paid blocking tight end in the league, $12,000 for a dirty hit versus the veteran minimum guy, $12,000. Rob's not even going to notice that. He's living off of endorsements anyway, right? He hasn't spent a dime of his actual salary. He doesn't have to, right? And, that all just goes investment anyway. So now he's got a little bit less of it. But, this guy that is making over the course of 4 years what he's going to need for the rest of his life, that $12,000 is going to matter a lot, right? So as always, a sliding scale, but the percentage of your salary that gets taken out changes, I think, based off of the number of practices / the number of times you violated it, especially after that first practice. So I think that's part of it. I still think you punish people who do that first practice because you're violating common sense. But I think but for that first practice, I would in particular punish Mike Vrabel if that conversation between the NFL and Mike Vrabel happened, because they, I think, effectively delegated responsibility to him, the leader of the team, to prevent them from practicing. And if he didn't do a very good job of that, that's literally his job. And so you should be able to fine him for that. So I think I would put more on Mike Vrabel for that first practice and the Titans organization overall for that first practice. And then in addition to that, I would not punish the Titans for players independently organizing a practice as a team, the Titans team, right? Which means draft picks and forfeits. But if they violated protocol while in the facility, I would punish them, right? And so if the Titans have to miss because they violated protocol in the facility, then I would say you forfeit. But if it's because individual players organized workouts, I wouldn't say that they get a loss on their schedule. I would say you cancel the game and you do it by win percentage. So that's kind of how I do it.
I don't know. If this is a situation where they discover that they were super lax in protocol the week of the Vikings game, which could be very possible.
That brings up something I didn't bring up. I was talking about all this game planning and practice stuff. The Vikings got screwed on this, right?
Completely.
Because they couldn't. Yeah, because they. I guess they won, so no harm, no foul. But actually, yes, right? Especially because there's a bunch of tiebreakers involved here. Like maybe they would have scored more points and allowed fewer points, right? Maybe they would have been able to, put in their backups, if they had won by enough. Or
if they'd won it all, the Vikings lost that game.
No, they couldn't practice for the Texans game.
Oh, gotcha.
Because of the Titans. Yeah. So, they might have been able to put in their backups, right, against the Texans, and that would have been nice. Or, the point scored is a tiebreaker, right? And, maybe that'll matter down the road. And so they did get kind of screwed on that because they only got to practice in the facility, I think, for one day. And so that's part of it too, right? There's probably not going to be competition going backwards for the Vikings based off of the competitive disadvantage that the Titans put them in, right? And so we're talking about how the players might feel like it sucks that they can't, practice for a game. And it's like, well, the Vikings couldn't do it. And as far as I know, the Vikings didn't organize a secret practice. I guess I'll have to check Eden Prairie High School to see if they did. But who knows, right? But as far as I know, the Vikings didn't organize a secret practice and like violate protocol. And so, why do the Titans feel entitled to it? So that's a part of it too. But yeah, sorry, I just I interrupted a thing you were saying because I was reminded of a point I wanted to make and I forgot to make. What were you saying?
Well, what I was saying was that the Vikings were put in a position where they were playing against players that clearly had active strains going at the time. Like this is a very difficult position, and the Vikings were somehow lucky. Well, not were somehow lucky. They luckily somehow avoided any form of infection, and you're putting another team at risk going out there like that. And it's not like the NFL made the call to have the game go on despite the fact that they knew it was going on. It's not like the Chiefs Patriots game that the top corner for the Patriots now has come down with COVID too. It's not like that sort of situation where the game was just determined by the NFL to just go on. This was something that was just scheduled and hadn't been like disclosed or anything. So this is rough. And if it turns out that the team was really lax the week of the game against somebody, and it turned out that they had COVID at the same time, it's really hard not to feel bad for the team that they played against, that they were potentially exposed to, or the team was exposed to. I'm not saying the Vikings should get a first-round draft pick from the Titans. I just think that that's incredibly crappy situation to be a part of. Like, that whole thing stinks.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. And one thing to add here is that evidently, according to Mike Sando at The Athletic, league executives thought beforehand that the Titans were already being very lax in their protocol. So I would be surprised if they didn't discover lapses in Titans protocol. So that's part of it too. One thing to kind of keep in mind is something I said kind of earlier in this part of the conversation, which is that if we have another outbreak, it may not necessarily be a product of someone being lazy or lax or whatever, right? All of these protocols minimize the probability, but they don't eliminate. They minimize the probability of additional spread. And so from everything we've seen from the Titans, it's not, a case where randomness just kind of went the wrong way, right? But it's something to kind of keep in mind going forward. I am not a huge fan of holding individual players accountable for contracting a disease, which I've seen a lot with people getting mad at Cam Newton for not apologizing for getting COVID, which is wild to me.
I
right?
was so proud of NFL Twitter for not jumping on the Cam Newton COVID train and saying, well, of course the most injury-prone quarterback in the league is the first guy of note to really get COVID. I was proud that NFL Twitter somehow avoided that low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm super happy about that too. But I have seen, not from people I follow, but I click on a tweet, I look at the replies because I'm an idiot, and I have seen some people be like, well, why hasn't Cam apologized? And it's just like, we can't do that. I'm not going to hold people accountable for that if we don't have evidence that they were like careless or anything like that, because you can get the disease while being very careful. So that's something to kind of keep in mind too. And I bet spread can occur. Like, I don't think it's impossible. Spread can occur among a team that completely meets the protocol. It's just like a thing that can happen. All we're doing is minimizing the possibility of spread. So which is likely to reduce the number of people who catch it because it'll happen slower and you'll be able to kind of quarantine them in time. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But at the moment, it certainly seems like the Titans are very culpable for their impact on the rest of the NFL right now.
Yeah. This is, and would it help if they were able to move the end of the season? Like the problem with, because people have said, the problem with the difference between the NFL and Major League Baseball is the fact that they were able to double up on games, which isn't something that the NFL is able to do. So if you had an end of the season that was somewhat flexible in that you were able to move the Super Bowl a bit, it's not like the Super Bowl is going to have a bunch of fans going to it or anything right now. So I don't even, where is the Super Bowl supposed to be held this year anyway? I assume Florida.
Is it Las Vegas? What's Super Bowl? I'm going to Google Super Bowl 2021.
Oh, I think it's Los Angeles. Isn't it?
No, it's Las Vegas.
It is Vegas. Okay.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
That's where we're at this year. Where the hell is the Super Bowl supposed to be this year anyway? Vegas? Sure. Let's just call it there.
No, it's Tampa. Why did I get Vegas? What's going on? Why did Google tell me Vegas?
Oh, that's right, because they made a big deal about the fact that Tom Brady could play a Super Bowl in his home stadium.
Right.
Assuming that team finds the Fountain of Youth somewhere in Florida. Okay.
Right. Google must have told me Vegas because the draft or something. I don't know. That was very weird.
That's peculiar. Yeah, it is. It is definitely Tampa Bay.
Yeah. Great. Florida.
Where
cool.
they recently got permission, and for the, I think it was the Dolphins got permission to have the full stadium, and the Dolphins went, no thanks, but appreciate it. No.
They clarified and said actually all three teams can, which that makes it worse. Thanks, guys. But at least you're fair. But all three teams were like, that's cool. That's good to know that we could do that. We won't. So but the Dolphins still have like 13,000, right? That's like a quarter of the stadium, I think.
Yeah. I mean, Arif, we talked about potentially going to the Bucks game this year. So I mean, apparently that's still on the table. Ugh. That'll be fun. We'll do a live show. It'll be outdoors. We'll be wearing
absolutely the masks through the mics.
Yeah, masks and full on Breaking Bad bunny suits, like the type that Jesse was wearing and like it was bouncing around with the full of air. It'll be like that. Just ridiculous. Yeah. All right. Let's
before we move on to the next question, one thing I just want to add is if they do force the Bucks to take losses on their official record for the season, Titans, right? I mean, they might as well, right? The Bucks, come on, after what we saw. But the Titans, if they force the Titans to take official losses, they should not count as losses for the purposes of determining draft order, right? Because the more losses you have, the higher up in the draft order you are. In fact, they should be counted as wins. It's like a double punishment.
I could see that. Yeah, as far as your draft position goes, it should count as a win. Or if what you did is so bad that the NFL, after they review the tapes thoroughly, multiple times, maybe even bring in people who were directly affected by it. How many thinly veiled references to Ray Rice can I make? I'm going for 30 or whatever his number was, 8. I don't know. It's like I'm really like trying something. Yeah, it's even more. It's even less subtle than when I make reference to how Ben Roethlisberger makes me uncomfortable to talk about him as a quarterback. So I'm going to make this is my last Ray Rice reference of the day. Yeah, as soon as they review the tapes, if they do discover that things are as bad as have been rumored, this could be a situation where they end up losing a first-round pick. And I don't know if many people around the NFL could argue successfully that they shouldn't.
I mean, yeah. If it continues to have an impact on the season, it's very difficult to justify giving them a first round pick, and very likely that just means there's going to be 31 picks, right, in the first round. So some rookie's going to get screwed out of having a 5th year option in their contract and a much better contract situation. But whatever. I wouldn't want to give that first round pick to anybody. But even for calculating the second, third, fourth round picks, you would say, well, okay, for the season, they went 7-9, so they don't make the playoffs. But for the draft, we'll treat them like a 9-7 team, so they're further down the draft order. Something like that, right? So even for the second, third, fourth rounds, just because it's just like, yeah, we'll get rid of a pick and then we'll discount the rest of your picks. And if they pick a bunch of good players, like good on them. But for sure.
Just curious about the harshest penalties the NFL has ever put in. And of course, the first thing that comes up is the Packers gambling scandal. So that's awesome. I was just curious about like if there's ever been a situation where other than Spygate, where there was
multiple
fines, but they didn't really lose much, did they? No, they did. They took away a first round pick.
Yeah, they took away a first round pick for Spygate. For Bountygate, they took away 2 second-round picks from the Saints, as well as like suspending a bunch of. They suspended 2 coaches and a player and all that.
And Mickey Loomis also got suspended. Mickey
Loomis got suspended.
Any chance I get to remind people that Mickey Loomis is a scumbag, I will take.
Yeah, there's a lot of chances, man. For the Patriots poaching Bill Belichick from the Jets, I think they. So I don't know if this counts as a penalty or if they were just like, okay, we'll treat this like a trade, and they traded a first round pick from the Patriots to the Jets, which we're still waiting to see who won that trade, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. The Jets with how many coaches since then?
Right. I love that Wikipedia has a section on Bill Belichick with the Jets. He has 2 stints as the head coach of the New York Jets without ever coaching a game.
Class. Just class.
But yeah, they let's see, was it first round? Yeah, the Patriots gave the Jets a first round pick in 2000 in exchange for the right to hire Belichick. All right, so that's kind of where we are. There were a couple of second round picks lost by the Saints. There's a first round pick lost by the Patriots, and a first round pick effectively traded away by the Patriots.
Yeah, that's a bit of a fun mess. We'll see what they end up doing. Hopefully, there's some sort of announcement on it because Titans players keep testing positive, which is an obvious problem because they want to open up the facility and can't. Former Vikings tight end Michael Pruitt also tested positive today, but he wasn't a part of the actual practices that were going on. He was saying that it appears to be unrelated. So this
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, this thing just isn't going away. So
yeah, well, I mean that's kind of how spread works, right? Like you don't have to be at the initial contact. Like you could be doing everything you need. That's like the insidious thing, and that's why that's why so many people are incensed at a lot of the players that violated protocol, either, in spirit, right, by going to work out knowing that they probably shouldn't have worked out, or in practice specifically working out when they weren't told to, because it impacts people that do not engage in this behavior, that do everything they can to protect everybody around them, including themselves and their own family. And so, yeah, Michael Pruitt, that's a perfect example of that, right? Where maybe he caught it from the Titans, maybe not, right? Like it could just be, like you said, a totally unrelated thing. But it's like if somebody does something that puts everybody at risk, the nature of a virus is that now it puts everybody that you're in contact with, and you're going to have to be in contact with people because we're humans. It puts them at substantially more risk, and then they're at risk. They catch it because of what you did that was unrelated to anything they did, and then they are in contact with somebody else and they spread it to somebody. And now there's 2 innocent parties along this chain that didn't do anything that magnified the risk. And so that's a big part of it. I mean, and there's a number of Titans that are on the COVID reserve list that have nothing to do with this. Like I think the September 24th positive for Greg Mabin, I think, is unrelated. And certainly the Isaiah Wilson, who is on the COVID reserve list twice so far this year. And then I think was on injured reserve after that. He's having a rough rookie year. But, he initially was on the list in May and then again on the list in on September 8th or something. And we don't technically know whether or not he's ever tested positive. But it feels pretty likely that, one of those instances he probably tested positive, and the other instance was when, somebody close to him had prolonged contact. But yeah, so there's some instances on the Titans where it might not have anything to do with any of this.
Yeah. Let's go to the next question, which is from Luke Braun, who asks, how many more injuries until the Vikings sign Arif to play linebacker?
Well, I mean, everyone knows I'm a cornerback. Come on.
Yeah, you have to play to Arif's strengths, and that doesn't include height or strength here. You like literal strength. You have to send him out on an island. Arif Island is a very lonely place. You will only find Arif on it because that receiver is going to be 20 yards past him.
One would hope it's a lonely place. I'm going to be a cover 2 corner. I'm just going to cover the flat and hope that nobody throws it short.
There you go. I don't want to have to tackle the runner here. Am I really going to? Why do I have the green dot?
DK Metcalf tweet. What are you going to do to stop him? Oh, yeah, I'm going to step like 3 feet to the right. Bro, you have to tackle him. No, I don't.
No,
that's a social construct.
My tackling ability is purely all wrapped up in the possibility that I fall and he trips over me. That's what's.
I'll tabletop him. That's my contribution.
Exactly. All right. Tyler asks, is Dalvin Cook the best running back in the NFL for overall skill set, running inside, outside, power zone, catching, blocking, vision, burst, speed, and power? One word answer.
No.
All right, expound on this.
Okay, so I have to do more than that. So let's say we exclude. So part of this is he the most valuable? This is definitively whether or not he has the most expansive skill set and he checks all the boxes to a super positive degree. And the problem here is that there are certainly a lot of faster running backs than him that have a full skill set. So, for example, so Dalvin Cook is really great when it comes to the first 5 yards of a run. He's really explosive in that regard. But there's a bunch of backs that kind of meet him with that. So, like Ezekiel Elliott's a really good example. Both Ezekiel Elliott and Christian McCaffrey also have better long speed. They're also better receivers. Ezekiel Elliott is a much, much better pass protector than Dalvin Cook. So that's something to kind of keep in mind in terms of, things like vision and the ability to play in multiple schemes. Dalvin Cook has not really played in a power scheme. And so for us to say that he's versatile enough to play in a bunch of schemes requires, I think, a lot of projection, because one of the things coming out of the draft when I was talking to running back experts is that Dalvin Cook is kind of a zone-only guy and that he would succeed in only zone, whereas somebody like McCaffrey can succeed anywhere. I think Zeke can kind of succeed anywhere. And then if we get kind of out of those two, what about Derrick Henry? He's got more speed, he's got more size, he's got more power, he's got a little bit more pass protection capability. He's a decent receiver, but I think it's easy to overrate Dalvin Cook as a receiver, given that since he's been in the NFL, he's had a lot of difficulty corralling the ball in. So I don't know that he's all that great of a receiver. So you can't even say he's got a full, well-rounded skill set. Now, between him and, say a rookie phenom like James Robinson, I would say Robinson has a higher ceiling to demonstrate a more versatile skill set than Dalvin Cook. But, Cook has done a lot, and I would say Cook right now is probably the better back between the two based off of what they've done so far. Cook has dealt with a worse offensive line in terms of run blocking. He's gotten more yards after contact. He's avoided more tackles. He has more yards, right, that he's created and stuff like that. So, but I think that James Robinson is kind of a better skill set in that regard. Nick Chubb, he played in a power scheme earlier. Now he's in his own scheme, obviously, but he's demonstrated remarkable capability in both. He's a pretty decent pass catcher. He's a pretty decent run blocker or pass blocker. I would say Nick Chubb also has a very complete skill set that Dalvin Cook kind of doesn't have. So I wouldn't say that Dalvin Cook either checks the box as the best running back in the NFL, which I think a lot of people would agree is probably Christian McCaffrey or Derrick Henry, or the most complete running back in the NFL, which I think you're getting much closer to somebody like Ezekiel Elliott, who I think is kind of the prototypical complete running back. Like out of receiving backs, Aaron Jones has been a better receiving back this year. James Robinson has been a bit of a better receiving back. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey is up there. But then you get into discussions about Alvin Kamara, right? Like how he's really valuable, even though he's not as good a pure runner or as good of a pass protector. So all of that, I think, if you include kind of the whole skill set, even I think if you stack the deck and say not the most valuable or the best, but the whole skill set, I think even then Dalvin Cook isn't up there. That said, there's not a ton of people that match Dalvin Cook. And in the last show, in the mailbag, I was asked, or it wasn't even in the mailbag. I think it was just you, James. It was just asked, has Dalvin Cook lived up to his contract? And thus far, he has, which I didn't expect and is fairly rare at this point. So this is not a knock on Dalvin Cook, but if I were picking between running backs based off of these sets of criteria, I don't know that I would ever pick Dalvin Cook. But Cook has done a lot so far this year, where it's very likely that he's responsible for his rushing production so far.
Is Alvin Kamara even in New Orleans anymore? All I see is their backup quarterback attempting to run.
Which one, right? No, Alvin Kamara was a big part of their win against the Raiders. So, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
it had nothing. It had nothing to do with Taysom Hill.
Yeah, that one had nothing to do with Taysom Hill.
No,
maybe the other ones. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Jordan asks, being one of the more difficult positions to adjust to in the NFL, how long does tight end development typically take? Is the breakout typically extended in the second or third year? Are expected in the second or third year? In other words, when should we start being concerned about Irv Smith?
So I would say you'd probably have to wait until week 8 anyway before you'd even have this question, because Irv got targeted a lot in week 2 and he didn't, reel them in for whatever reason, right? Which I don't expect to be a persistent problem. Week 3, he didn't get any targets, right? Or maybe it's week 3, he got targeted a bunch. Week 4, he didn't get any, something like that. I think it was that he got 4 targets against the Titans and like 1 catch. We asked about that in a Zimmer presser, and he said that's actually not a huge issue because we've actually designed plays for him, and then the read wasn't there. Like they closed in on him, and so Cousins had to go second or third in his progression. So they're designing plays where he's the number 1 receiver in the progression. So they clearly have a lot of confidence in him. Now, as to the question about how long it takes tight ends to get kind of up to speed, whether or not we're going to see, who they are. What's interesting is that I would have expected, based off of how difficult this position is traditionally to learn, that it would be year 3. But I looked it up going into, Pro Football Focus has a bunch of data about every player drafted between 2006 and 2016, how long it takes for them to produce at what we would consider to be their level. And for tight ends, it's year 2, actually. Like year 3 is typically when they peak, but year 2 is when you get close enough to determine their level of play. That's also true for receivers. If you don't really have a great receiver by year 2, the odds are you just don't have a great receiver. Running backs, right away. If they don't produce right away, the odds are you just don't have a good running back. Centers, year 3. So year 1 and year 2 can go poorly, but by year 3, you'll have kind of learned who they are. And so that's interesting because quarterbacks, it's kind of year 2. And they don't have to be like MVP quality by year 2. But if they haven't improved substantially by year 2, it's very unlikely that they'll be a very good quarterback in year 3, which that accords with research I found going all the way back to like 2009. It's a blog post that is no longer up because Pro Football Reference no longer hosts blogs, but you can go into like the web archive to find it. So I'll see if I can do that and put it in the show notes. And it's titled something like, "When Should the Lions Have Given Up on Joey Harrington?" So that's how old it is. It asked that question. And they went through years of data and they said, there are exceptions. Donovan McNabb's a good one, where if you don't have it by year 2, you should probably just give up on the guy, which is so counterintuitive. I think year 3 is when we typically do it. But in the NFL now, we're seeing it more often. They just gave up on Dwayne Haskins, but part of that's because he's not Ron Rivera's guy. They gave up on Josh Rosen right away. But yeah, we'll see. But I'll link that in the blog post. But for tight ends, it's also year 2. So if we don't see production out of Irv Smith by like later this year, by like week 10, then I think it's worth having that conversation. But I think until then, they are targeting him. He just did get a target last week. They are designing plays for him, but the play just wasn't there for whatever reason. So I think that'll even out over time.
Next question is from Christopher Wiley, who asks, PFF's ratings on rookie wide receivers are at an all-time high. Cornerbacks, not so much. How much is a function of COVID, and how much is this much ballyhooed class living up to expectation?
Oh, is this just a question about rookie receivers?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. We actually have seen some good performances from rookie cornerbacks. L'Jarius Sneed's a really good example of, I would say he's probably the best rookie corner. I don't know. Dan Brugler just published something about who he thought the best rookie corners were, and he picked Jalen Johnson, who just had an interesting game against Tampa Bay. For Chicago as his number one. L'Jarius Sneed, I think, is his number two, and I picked Sneed as my number one. But if we wanted to use Pro Football Focus grades to be able to kind of get like a good, as close to apples comparison as we can get, the top grade is 69, nice 0.3, and then 65.7, 64.2. So that's the top three grades. Now, receiving, we already know that receiving is different because Justin Jefferson's the highest graded receiver in the NFL right now. So it was 90.6, then 75.4, then 71.8. So actually, you have to go all the way down to fourth, Gabriel Davis, 70.7, to find a receiver that's close to the number one cornerback. So I think this is a combination of things. So first, offenses are better right now than they have been in the first four opening weeks of, I think, any other season. There's a couple of reasons for that. Penalties are down. Holding penalties, I think you have one fewer holding penalty a game. I think defensive pass interference is at the same rate, but offensive pass interference is not. So offensive penalties, I think, are down. So that plays a role. I think the fact that defenses need to have communication, otherwise you have busted coverages, I think that plays a pretty big role because remember this conversation we just had with whether or not George Loco was responsible or Cameron Dancer was responsible for a busted coverage on, was it Will Fuller for a touchdown from last week? Well, one of those guys is a rookie corner, and he got graded poorly on that play because it was his responsibility. But if there was enough time to kind of set up and train Josh Metellus to be a backup safety and give him preseason reps and have, spring and OTAs, they would have not only been able to develop that safety, but they would have had the chemistry and communication with the rest of that defense to figure out what they needed to do in that situation, right? So that plays a role too, is that there needs to be defensive communication. And I was asked about this actually on the Man to Man podcast with Michael-Shawn Dugar. I was on his podcast a couple days ago to preview the game, and he asked me this question: does it seem like offenses are doing better, and why are they doing better? And I think this is part of it. And one piece of evidence that kind of tracks with it is if you take a look at the defenses that kind of rely a lot more on chaos. So the Baltimore Ravens, they're blitz heavy, they're chaotic, they rely on man-to-man, so there's not much in the need of communication between all the individual defensive players. You've got the Buccaneers defense, which despite, how poorly the Buccaneers played against the Bears, the defense still didn't give up that many points. The Buccaneers defense is kind of one of the, is performing, I think, above levels of expectation for people. Well, they're also a pretty chaotic defense, and they don't really require as much in terms of communication because there's a bunch of man coverage in the back end. You take a look at the Patriots defense. That's kind of one of the better defenses right now. They're like top 8, I think, in points per game. They're a man-to-man defense. They're one of the heaviest man-to-man defenses in the NFL. So that requires a little bit less in terms of communication. The Pittsburgh Steelers are blitzing a little bit more. So those defenses that do a little bit more in man coverage and do a little bit more in terms of blitzing, I think are performing above expectation, whereas the other defenses that rely on man match coverage, that rely on complex coverage calls that require a lot of chemistry between the defenders, they're not doing as well. And I think that trickles down, obviously, to when we compare, to go back to the original question about rookies. So I think that plays a role, is that these rookie corners are being thrust into a situation where they have to communicate or they have to have an understanding of the defense that would typically be imparted to them over the course of a full offseason and a preseason. So in that respect, COVID plays a role. But also, this is the best receiver class we've seen since 2014, possibly even better than that class, based off of the first couple of games that we've had, right? Because CeeDee Lamb is like the fourth best receiver in the past 10 years in terms of receiving yardage through 4 games, and Justin Jefferson is the best receiver, right? And there's another, I think, 2020 receiver on the list as well. This is a really great receiver class, and so that plays a role too. This was not as interesting a cornerback class, I think. We had this discussion, like, hey, how good is this cornerback class? Well, Denzel Ward's great, but then you get to Christian Fulton and Jeff Gladney and all of these other kind of potential first-round guys. Noah Igbenogany for the Dolphins, I think he ended up going in the second round, was considered potentially a first-round guy. Or no, I think he did go in the first round. AJ Terrell for the Falcons, who, more notable right now for having gotten COVID. Those are guys that I think people were not as excited about as they were about third, fourth, and even fifth round picks like Tyler Johnson, right? Like, people got excited about Gabriel Davis. People were excited about, and he's already performing pretty well for the Bucs. Second round picks like Michael Pittman, people were excited about. T. Higgins, second round pick for the Bengals. He's playing really well. People were way more excited about those guys. And admittedly, they tend to get more excited about receivers than they were about, cornerbacks going in the second round or even the first round. A notable exception being Antoine Winfield is a cornerback safety that also is just performing lights out to no one's surprise. So, yeah, there's a talent difference between the receivers and the cornerbacks. That's a big part of it. But then also the cornerbacks are playing from behind too, because I think it takes a little bit longer to learn that kind of communication that you need along the defense. Whereas though you do have to develop chemistry with a quarterback, and that's kind of difficult with a rookie, I think it's easier to do that, especially like in an off-season workout or something like that.
Kenneth Allen asks, will this game be the one that people point to at the end of the season as definitive evidence that Wilson was the 2020 MVP?
I don't think so. So first, Wilson just had like a 4-touchdown game, right? Let me. So right now he leads the league in touchdowns thrown, which is interesting because he's a Seahawk, right? He's coming off of like 2 5-touchdown games, one against the Patriots defense, which people respect a lot, and one against the Dallas defense, which whatever, right? They're probably going to point to that game against Cam Newton and a pretty decent Patriots defense than they are this Vikings defense that like clearly sucks. If he gets 10 touchdowns, like maybe. But like at some point, someone's just going to be like, yeah, that's the Vikings. Who cares?
At some point, they would pull him. Be like, we're already 55 up. You can sit down, Russ. You're done cooking for the day.
Yeah. There's a touchdown limit, basically.
Yeah. Also asked by Kenneth Allen, is Chris Carson that good? I can never really tell.
He's receiving well. He's... I don't know. I asked Michael-Shawn about this actually on his podcast. Is Chris Carson good? And I guess the answer to that is he's fine. He's not bad. He's not like a liability. I mean, he had fumble. Which game did he fumble? But it was the last game. It was against Miami. But he's not like setting them behind. Like if the blocks are there, he'll get them. He's gotten a little bit more than the blocking available to him at times. But it really doesn't matter because they'll play all 4 running backs. So he's fine. But like if he's not, they'll just play Travis Homer a bunch. Like who cares? So he's not like top 8, right? So if that answers your question.
Kyle Slaby asks, if we drafted an offensive guard with the 16th pick next year, and they had the below 5-year career with the team before suddenly retiring, would they be a bust? Year 1, he's a backup. Year 2, 32nd best starter at position. Year 3, 16th best starter. Year 4, top 5 or top 10. Year 5 is a top 5, and then he would just opt and retire.
Just retire. I would say it would depend on so this is a guard, right? I would say at a different position, that might not be a bust, right? At quarterback, I think it's probably not a bust, which then kind of raises the question, was Andrew Luck a bust? Probably not. At receiver, I think that's probably not a bust. At cornerback, that might not be a bust, and that's interesting because it's kind of close-ish to Trey Waynes. But at guard, I think that is a bust. Because if you're at a position that's less valuable, then you need to be better right away for longer in order to justify getting a high draft pick when they could have gotten a much better position. So I think at guard, that's a bust. But and it would make for a bunch of interesting conversations. Like, can Rick Spielman evaluate offensive linemen? I have no idea, right? Because that guy sucked, but then he didn't. But yeah, I think at guard that's a bust. I like the positional importance where that's kind of where you're kind of debating back and forth. Probably defensive end or edge rusher, I would say, is probably around there, assuming the kind of the PFF war positional ratings are accurate, where it goes like quarterback, receiver, cornerback, safety, probably tight end, tackle, edge rusher, then defensive tackle, linebacker, guard, center, I think. Then running back, obviously, at the bottom. But yeah, I would say probably edge rushers the kind of the point where you're like, maybe not.
Also from Kyle Slaby, without star pass rusher Jamal Adams, will the Seahawks be able to get pressure from anywhere but Samia's gap?
Yeah, I asked this question to Michael-Shawn in the interview, and that's going to be a very resistible force meets a very movable object. So we'll see. My estimation is that given how poor that defensive line is at pass rushing, and given how poor Samia is at pass protecting, that Samia's struggles will outweigh the Seahawks struggles finding pressure up the middle. Samia is like the worst guard in the NFL right now, whereas the Seahawks pass rushing capability from the defensive tackle position is not dead last. So that would kind of imply that they'll find some way to get pressure up the middle. But otherwise, yeah, they're having a lot of difficulty generating pressure.
Next question is from Don from Ohio, who asks, I think this whole Arif as a Seahawks fan is getting old and repetitive. Here's a question not asked before. Did Trey Lance shut up his critics with his performance last week?
All right, so strongly agree that the meme that I'm a Seahawks fan is repetitive and boring. Trey Lance. Here is what Daniel Jeremiah, a huge Trey Lance fan, had to say. I compared Lance to Andrew Luck after studying him this summer. However, in this game, I can't remember Luck missing some of the layups that Lance missed. When it comes to size, arm strength, athletic ability, and competitiveness, I still see a lot of Luck in Lance's game. I just think the former Colts QB was a little more accurate. Today, Lance reminded me more of Dak Prescott. Now, that's not bad, but I would say that this game more validated his criticisms. He threw his first pick ever, right? He mostly has kind of build and arm strength going for him. He doesn't have the accuracy based off of this game. He missed a couple of deep balls early on, lost a fumble. You wanted to see more. So I would say it's not that he shut up his critics. I think it's that he supercharged his critics. I, of course, am objective on this question.
Yeah, that was an interesting. I don't know if you sat down and watched it or if your TV would have burst into flames if you turned it on. But this was clearly an NDSU team that was having a lot of trouble with Central Arkansas.
Yeah, man, Central Arkansas. Wow, I don't know how NDSU is going to jump to the FBS with performances like that.
Yeah, it's rough to be sure. Peter asks, what recipe you learned during quarantine do you want to keep with you for the rest of your life?
Okay, so I just made mapo tofu, which is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite dishes ever, and it turns out when it's homemade, it's even more delicious, which is true for a lot of recipes, but sometimes it's not, right? The problem is that it requires tons of specialized ingredients. So like dosher, which is like a fermented black bean, requires red chili bean paste. It requires, it requires tofu, which I just never buy. but like it requires like all of these specialized ingredients that I just typically don't buy. So having that as a recipe in my back pocket is kind of difficult. Like if I can materialize these ingredients whenever I need them, that's the one I pick. But if not, um, then probably the bread we've baked, because that was actually really good and it wasn't difficult, it turns out. So I'm gonna go with the bread, even though that's like the easiest and cheapest thing to get, because it's like kind of fun to make, and the better you get at it, the more like weird stuff you can do to it.
There you go. I'm gonna go with the apple pie ribs that I put together after the 4th of July. Those were easily the best ribs I've ever had in my life. And every time I make ribs, it now ends up getting compared to that moment. So I'm gonna end up going with that. It was from the How to Barbecue Right people, and it was truly delicious. It was like apple wood smoke. It was apple juice spritz. It was apple butter in addition to a couple other things for the finish, apple jelly plus barbecue sauce for the ending. Like this, you couldn't have gotten more apple. It was impossible to get more apple flavor out of it, and it was so good. It was so delicious. Ricardo asks, "Good day, sirs. In the last episode, Arif mentioned his uncanny ability to tweet things into being using reverse psychology. This got me thinking about Matthew Collar and his ability to arrive on time, to arrive on town. I feel like there's a misspelling there. And wreck QB's knees. Are there any other Vikings media members with hidden superpowers of questionable usefulness? Apologies, I almost forgot about James's ability to destroy can openers."
It was I'm trying to remember which Buffalo quarterback slipped on a mat. Who it wasn't? Okay, when I Google Buffalo quarterback Matt, it just assumes that I want.
I was like, Matt Barkley going to come up or something?
Yeah, I don't want the extra T in there. Kevin Cobb, that's it. Slipped on a mat and tweaked his knee. So let's assume that that's Matthew Collar's fault. I think that's fair. And then I guess make it Sam Bradford is also Matthew Collar's fault then. That's fine. I'm okay with that. Which would also make Teddy maybe Matthew Collar's. I don't know. Collar wasn't here for Teddy, was he? 2016, maybe he was. But so that would make 2016 and 2017. So that's interesting. So what are the Vikings media members with the hidden superpowers of questionable usefulness? I feel like Eric Thompson has one or 8. I just can't name any off the top of my head.
It's just, well, he does always have he has a tweet for everything. So as it turns out, most things for Minnesota sports are just negative. So he is, if nothing else, always prepared.
Let's see. Man, this is such a fun question, and I wish I had like a better answer to it. But maybe we can just have some people respond with theirs, and then we can kind of fill Ricardo in next week with the observations that other people have of Vikings media.
There we go. I will say that surprisingly, I have not destroyed the left-handed can opener that I ended up picking up that we spent a while on the show shopping for and discussing. I have managed to not destroy that.
Why do we do this on the show?
Well, it came up as a topic because I can destroy can openers really, really easily with.
No, I know. I remember 2 extended conversations we've had on the show about this. I'm just wondering, like, why I looked up reviews of can openers on air.
Because you were concerned about me. You were concerned about my. You wanted to make sure I had a quality product that I was going to choose, and then I decided to choose one that you hadn't recommended. So really, it was just a giant waste for
you. Did you end up getting a manual one or an electric one?
I did end up getting a manual one.
Okay, and, yeah, that's why I was disappointed in you.
Yeah, I decided to go that route and everything, and it surprisingly has held up fairly well, albeit it still has awkward moments of twisting and getting everything going. But yes, the left-handed can opener has been useful and successful over the years since we had that conversation. So That's a thing. All right, well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We hope you enjoyed it. Arif, let's plug your work.
So over at The Athletic, I've got my piece on Justin Jefferson and about how he's kind of had a fast start to his rookie year. We already plugged a little bit of Michael-Shawn Dugar's pieces. I've got the Player of the Week piece coming up, or that I've got every week, obviously. And so that one generated a lot of interesting conversation because I left Justin Herbert off, but I left Dak Prescott on. Did not include Drew Brees or Tom Brady. A bunch of really interesting arguments that I think are pretty fair. But nothing else at The Athletic this week for me. I didn't preview the Seahawks game. One thing kind of worth mentioning that I would have probably put if I had written a preview is that the Vikings offense is 4th. The Seahawks offense is 10th in big plays, which is rushes over 10 yards, passes over 20 yards. And the Vikings defense and the Seattle Seahawks defense are tied for 8th most big plays given up. So going to be a ton of big plays given up in this game. Over-under is 57.5. Should be fun to see them hit the over. So that was all I was going to write about, which is not enough to write an article about. So I just might as well put it here in the plug section. Otherwise, just follow me on Twitter at Arif NFL.
All right. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, we'll be back next week to review what ended up happening in Seattle after all. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to always bring your wine towel. And we will be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.